I represented myself in court. My husband and his mistress laughed. "You can't afford a lawyer, how pathetic." Everyone agreed, until the judge turned to his lawyer and said, "You don't recognize her?" My husband went pale. "My name is Cassidy, and I am 33 years old. For 5 years, I played the role of the quiet, unremarkable wife to a prominent investment banker. He thought I was just a remote data entry clerk earning $40,000 a year. He thought I was a nobody he could easily discard when he leveled up in life. He had absolutely no idea that I am actually a forensic accountant and the anonymous director of Apex Forensics, a firm appointed by the federal court. Before I continue this story and tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who severely underestimated your worth. The destruction of my marriage did not start with a scream or a shattered glass. It started on a freezing rainy Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago, exactly on our 5th wedding anniversary. I had spent the afternoon braving the miserable weather to pick up a vintage bottle of scotch he had been talking about for months. I walked into the lobby of our luxury high-rise building, my coat soaked, but my heart relatively light. I actually believed we were going to order takeout, open the expensive bottle, and celebrate half a decade of building a life together. I rode the elevator up to the penthouse floor, entirely unaware that the man waiting inside had already erased me from his future. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the foyer. The first thing I noticed was not the smell of a home-cooked meal or the sight of anniversary flowers. It was the distinct, cheap smell of industrial black trash bags. I stopped in my tracks. There were 6 massive garbage bags piled high in the center of our pristine living room, resting right on top of the imported rug I had spent weeks picking out. The top of one bag had torn open, revealing a tangle of my sweaters, my favorite winter coat, and the carefully folded blouses I wore for my remote meetings. He had not just packed my belongings, he had literally thrown my life into the garbage. Bradley was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, his long legs crossed perfectly, a glass of amber liquid resting casually in his hand. At 35 years old, my husband was the picture of corporate arrogance. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, the exact one he always wore when closing a major acquisition at his investment bank. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place, and his expression was completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. He looked at me the same way he looked at an underperforming asset in his portfolio. "You are home early," he said, his voice flat and unapologetic. I stared at the trash bags, the rain dripping from my coat onto the hardwood floor. "What is this, Bradley? What are my clothes doing in garbage bags? Today is our anniversary." He took a slow, deliberate sip from his glass before setting it down on the glass coffee table. Next to his drink rested a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He picked up the stack and tossed it onto the glass surface. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "Those are divorce papers," he stated, leaning back into the cushions. "I already signed my portion. I need you to sign them tonight. Do not bother reading through the asset division. The lawyer made sure it is ironclad. You get what you came into this marriage with, which is essentially nothing." I stood frozen, the anniversary gift, suddenly feeling like a lead weight in my hands. "You are divorcing me, just like that. On our anniversary." Bradley let out a short, humorless laugh. "There is never a good day for bad news, Cassidy. Let us not make this more dramatic than it needs to be. I am moving in a different direction with my life, and frankly, you do not fit into the picture anymore." He stood up, walking slowly around the coffee table, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "Look at yourself, Cassidy. I am a senior director at one of the top investment funds in the country. I attend galas, charity dinners, and high-stakes networking events. My colleagues have wives who are ambitious, elegant, and driven. And what do? You sit at home in sweatpants typing numbers into spreadsheets for some low-level administrative company. You make, what, $40,000 a year? You are a glorified secretary." The casual cruelty of his words hung in the cold air of the apartment. For 5 years, I had maintained my low-profile cover to protect my highly sensitive work at Apex Forensics. I audited federal fraud cases, unraveled offshore money laundering schemes, and testified as an expert witness in sealed courtrooms. I kept my identity hidden for safety and confidentiality, allowing Bradley to believe he was the sole financial powerhouse in our home. I had played the supportive, quiet wife so he could shine, and this was my reward. "You are boring, Cassidy," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have no drive, no ambition, no desire to level up in life. You are perfectly content being completely unremarkable. I need someone who operates on my level, someone who understands the complexities of real wealth and power. You are just dead weight, and I am finally cutting my losses. I looked at the trash bags containing the clothes I had worn. While quietly paying half the mortgage on this very apartment money, I funneled through a discreet trust so he could maintain the illusion of being the sole provider. I looked at the divorce papers resting on the table. A lesser woman would have cried. A lesser woman would have fallen to her knees, begged him to reconsider, or screamed about the injustice of throwing away 5 years of loyalty. But I did not cry. My analytical mind, the same mind that hunted down white-collar criminals for the federal government, instantly detached from the emotional betrayal and shifted into total survival mode. He thought I was an uneducated, unremarkable data entry clerk who would just quietly sign away her rights and vanish into the night. He thought I lacked the resources to fight him. He was relying on my supposed poverty to bully me into a swift, uncontested exit. "I need you out by midnight," Bradley added, checking his luxury watch as if I were a late appointment. He was eager to dismiss. "The bags are packed. Leave your keys on the counter. I have an early meeting tomorrow, and I do not want to wake up to your tears. Just sign the papers, take your garbage, and go back to whatever mediocre life you came from." I looked him dead in the eyes, my expression a completely blank slate. I did not raise my voice. I did not show him a single ounce of the rage boiling just beneath my skin. I simply nodded, turned on my heel, and walked out the door, leaving the anniversary gift sitting on the entry table. He had no idea that by kicking me out, he had just invited the most ruthless financial investigator in the country to completely dismantle his entire existence. Before I could even process the absolute audacity of his demand, the soft rhythmic sound of bare feet descending the hardwood spiral staircase broke the silence of the room. I shifted my gaze past my husband. A woman was walking down the steps, trailing her hand along the glass railing with the casual entitlement of someone who already believed she owned the place. She was young, maybe 27, with sleek blonde hair perfectly blown out and a manicured appearance that screamed expensive maintenance. But it was not her youth or her striking features that caught my attention. It was what she was wearing. She was wrapped in my ivory silk robe. Not just any robe, but a custom piece I had commissioned from a boutique in Milan during a solo business trip I had claimed was just a boring data entry seminar. The silk pooled around her ankles as she stepped off the last stair and glided across the living room to stand directly beside Bradley. She slipped her arm through his, resting her head against his tailored shoulder, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. Bradley did not flinch. He did not look ashamed or apologetic. He simply wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer. "This is Vanessa." He stated his tone as casual as if he were introducing a new colleague at a networking event. "She is a corporate attorney at Cole & Partners. We have been seeing each other for the past 8 months. Vanessa understands the pressures of my industry. She operates in the same circles I do. She is exactly the kind of partner I need by my side as I transition to the next phase of my career." Vanessa offered a tight, patronizing smile. She looked at the trash bags piled on the floor, then back at my wet coat. "I know this must be difficult for you to process, Cassidy," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension. "But you have to be realistic about this situation. Bradley and I are building a future together. A future that requires a certain standard of living and a certain caliber of social standing. You and he are simply incompatible." I stared at her, my face completely impassive. I watched the way she adjusted the lapels of my silk robe. I filed away her name, her age, and her law firm in my mind. Cole & Partners was a prestigious firm notorious for their aggressive litigation tactics. They charged exorbitant fees and catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. A junior attorney like Vanessa would be arrogant, hungry for partnership, and dangerously overconfident. "I think you should just sign the papers tonight and leave quietly," Vanessa continued, stepping slightly forward. "Bradley has been more than generous by packing your things for you. Do not make this a messy legal battle. I have seen women in your position try to fight back, and it always ends poorly for them. Do not bother wasting your energy trying to find a lawyer." She let out a soft, mocking laugh, glancing up at Bradley before turning her sharp eyes back to me. "My hourly consulting fee at the firm equals your entire monthly salary typing on a keyboard. You make what, barely $40,000 a year. A decent divorce attorney will demand a retainer of at least $20,000 just to open your file. You cannot afford to fight us. You cannot even afford to walk into the lobby of a reputable law firm. Just accept that you are out of your depth and walk away." The sheer arrogance of her statement was almost comical. She was standing in my house wearing my custom clothing, lecturing me about my finances, based on a fabricated tax return I had carefully engineered to keep Bradley in the dark. She thought she had me completely cornered. "It gets worse." Cassidy Bradley chimed in, pulling his phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen a few times and held it up. The bright display showed our joint banking application. The balance on the screen read 0. I froze, narrowing my eyes at the digital numbers. I transferred all the funds to a secure individual account this morning, Bradley explained, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. I also contacted the credit card companies. Your name has been removed as an authorized user on the platinum cards, and I have frozen the standard joint accounts. You currently have exactly whatever cash is sitting in your wallet. You emptied our accounts, I stated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You shut off my credit cards. I am protecting my assets, he corrected smoothly. I earned that money. My bonuses, my investments, my long hours at the firm built this wealth. You contributed a pathetic administrative salary that barely covered our monthly grocery bill. I am not going to let a disgruntled soon-to-be ex-wife drain my hard-earned capital out of spite. I looked around the expansive living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, the imported marble fireplace, the custom lighting fixtures. This apartment cost nearly $2 million. What about the house? I asked, my voice steady. I paid half the down payment when we bought this place 5 years ago. I wired $80,000 from my personal savings. You cannot just throw me out of a property I have equity in. Vanessa actually chuckled, shaking her head as if I were a slow child, failing to grasp a basic math concept. Oh, Cassidy, you really do not understand how the world works, do you? Bradley smirked, slipping his phone back into his pocket. We used your $80,000, yes. But do you remember the mountain of paperwork we signed at the closing? You were so overwhelmed by the legal jargon that you just signed wherever the broker pointed. I had my personal attorney draft a secondary agreement. Your contribution was legally categorized as a gift toward the purchase, not an equity stake. The deed to this penthouse is solely in my name. The mortgage is solely in my name. You have zero legal claim to this property. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. I knew exactly what paperwork I had signed 5 years ago. I knew every loophole, every clause, and every hidden liability in that contract. I had allowed him to put the deed in his name to shield the asset from potential federal scrutiny related to my undercover audits. He thought he had outsmarted me with a basic real estate maneuver. He had no idea that by claiming sole ownership of the property, he was also claiming sole liability for the massive undeclared tax liens I had quietly attached to it through a shell company. But I needed him to believe he had won. I needed him to feel invincible. So you are throwing me out into the rain, I said, making my voice tremble just slightly. I lowered my gaze to the floor, perfectly executing the role of a defeated, broken woman. I have no money, no credit cards, and nowhere to go. You want me to sleep on the street? You can call one of your little data entry friends and crash on their sofa, Bradley said coldly. Or check into a cheap motel with whatever cash you have left. I frankly do not care where you go, Cassidy. I just want you out of my space. Vanessa is moving her things in tomorrow morning, and I want this apartment cleared of your presence tonight. He picked up the heavy blue folder containing the divorce papers and shoved them toward my chest. Take these with you. Read them. Sign them. Now take your trash bags and get out. I took the heavy blue folder from his outstretched hand. The paper felt thick and expensive, exactly what I would expect from a pretentious firm like Cole and Partners. I did not throw it back at him. I did not scream obscenities or demand half of the furniture we had picked out together. I simply tightened my grip on the folder, keeping my face a mask of absolute submission. I turned away from the two of them and walked over to the pile of industrial black trash bags. I ignored the torn ones, spilling my silk blouses onto the hardwood floor. Instead, I reached behind the chaotic pile and grabbed the single, unassuming black suitcase I kept packed for emergencies. It contained everything I actually cared about. My encrypted hard drives, my secure identification tokens, and the backup credentials for my federal clearances. Bradley thought it was just a bag of old winter coats. I gripped the handle, pulled up the hood of my rain jacket, and walked toward the front door without looking back. I heard Vanessa let out a soft sigh of relief, followed by the clinking of Bradley pouring another glass of scotch to celebrate his easy victory. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. The latch clicked, sealing them inside their temporary illusion of power. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, hiding me from the penthouse floor, my posture completely transformed. The slumped, defeated slump of my shoulders vanished instantly. I stood up straight, rolling my neck to release the physical tension of playing the pathetic victim for the last 30 minutes. The elevator plummeted toward the ground floor, and a cold, razor-sharp focus settled over my mind. Bradley Reed truly thought he had just executed a flawless asset protection strategy. He thought he had outmaneuvered a basic administrative assistant. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed a loaded weapon to a forensic accountant who routinely dismantled multi-million-dollar corporate fraud rings before her morning coffee. I stepped out of the luxury high-rise building and into the freezing Chicago rain. The icy water lashed against my face, but the biting cold only made me feel more awake, more alive than I had felt in months. For 5 years, I had suffocated my true personality to play the role of the docile wife. I had nodded along to his arrogant financial lectures, pretending I did not understand the basic tax evasion loopholes he bragged about using for his clients. I walked past the line of waiting cabs, pulling my suitcase down the wet, dimly lit pavement. I did not care that my shoes were soaked or that my hair was clinging to my face. I walked with purpose until I reached the shadow of an adjacent parking garage entirely shielded from the street cameras and the prying eyes of the building concierge. I stopped under the concrete overhang and knelt beside my suitcase. I quickly unzipped the hidden reinforced lining at the bottom. I bypassed the standard compartments and reached into a signal-blocking pouch, pulling out a solid black, heavily encrypted smartphone. It was a device issued directly by my security division at Apex Forensics, completely untraceable and entirely off the grid. Bradley did not even know this phone existed. He thought he had disabled my only connection to the outside world when he cut off my primary cell service and froze my bank accounts an hour ago. I pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner and rapidly typed in a complex 16-digit alphanumeric passcode. The screen illuminated the dark alleyway with a harsh white light. I opened the encrypted communications channel and dialed a secure routing number. It rang exactly twice before my senior operations manager answered. His name was Cameron, and he was sitting in our secure data facility on the top floor of the financial district, surrounded by the best financial analysts in the country. "Good evening," Director Cameron said, his voice crisp and strictly professional over the encrypted line. "Are you secure?" "I am entirely secure," I replied, my voice cutting sharply through the sound of the pouring rain. "I need you to initiate a Level 4 forensic audit protocol immediately. Target is Bradley Reed." Cameron did not hesitate or ask unnecessary questions. "Understood. What are the specific parameters for the sweep?" I watched the rain wash over the dark pavement, a cold smile finally breaking across my face. "Sweep every single transaction Bradley Reed has made over the past 5 years. Dig into the hidden offshore accounts he manages. Track every single wire transfer he pushed through the Cayman Islands and pull the metadata on his encrypted corporate emails. I want his offshore tax evasion strategies mapped out. I want his corporate embezzlement footprints traced. I want every dirty financial secret he thinks he has buried brought to the surface. I want his entire financial existence dissected down to the last penny." Cameron audibly typed across his mechanical keyboard, the rapid clicking echoing through the phone speaker. "The firewall bypass is initiating now, Director. We are accessing the banking mainframes using our federal oversight authorization. We will have the preliminary data mapped and categorized by morning. Do we notify the Federal Oversight Committee regarding his ties to the investment fund?" "Not yet," I instructed smoothly, keeping my voice perfectly level. "We gather the ammunition first. I want a complete financial autopsy before we bring the hammer down. Bradley just signed a document claiming all assets as his own to keep them away from me. He thinks he is protecting his wealth, but he just legally claimed sole responsibility for millions of dollars in undeclared offshore funds. He tied the noose around his own neck. Let him think he holds all the cards. Let him get incredibly comfortable in his arrogance. The game begins now." I ended the call and slipped the ghost phone back into my pocket. The rain continued to pour down on the Chicago streets, washing away the last remaining traces of the naive, subservient wife I had pretended to be. I hailed a passing black car, giving the driver the address to my secure corporate loft downtown, a property Bradley knew absolutely nothing about. I leaned back against the leather seats of the car, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked window. My mind was already calculating the next phases of the operation. Bradley had made a fatal error by introducing Vanessa tonight. She was a junior attorney at Cole & Partners, a firm that prided itself on defending wealthy clients with aggressive, often unethical tactics. By bringing her into our apartment and flaunting her as his new partner, he had inadvertently given me the exact connection I needed. Vanessa was not just his mistress. She was his legal shield, helping him route dirty money through shell companies, under the guise of attorney-client privilege. She thought she was untouchable because of her law degree. She had no idea that Apex Forensics specialized in piercing attorney-client privilege when major fraud was involved. They were both so blinded by their own narcissism that they could not see the massive trap they were walking into. I closed the blue folder and rested it on my lap. Tomorrow, I would start playing the role of the desperate, abandoned woman. I would let them push me into a corner, I would let his family mock my apparent poverty. I would let them all dig their graves a little deeper, because when the time came to finally reveal exactly who they were dealing with, I wanted them to have absolutely no way out. 4 days passed before I was forced to step back into their toxic orbit. I had zero intention of engaging with the Reed family ever again, but Bradley had deliberately retained the one item I actually valued. It was a vintage silver locket, the only physical piece of evidence I had left of my biological mother before I entered the foster care system. He knew its immense sentimental value, which meant he knew I would eventually have to come back to retrieve it. I pulled my modest 5-year-old sedan into the sweeping circular driveway of Patricia Reed Opulent's suburban estate. The driveway was already packed with a fleet of high-end luxury vehicles. I parked near the very edge of the property, taking a deep, steadying breath before walking up to the massive, custom double doors. The housekeeper let me in, her eyes immediately darting away in obvious discomfort. She knew exactly what I was walking into. The heavy, rich scent of roasted lamb and expensive designer perfume drifted from the formal dining room down the hall. I did not bother taking off my coat. I walked straight down the corridor toward the sound of clinking crystal glasses and boisterous, arrogant laughter. I stopped in the arched doorway of the dining room, framing myself against the heavy mahogany trim. The entire family was gathered for Patricia mandatory Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual designed solely to stroke her fragile ego. Trent Bradley, older brother at 38, was aggressively pouring himself a heavy second glass of bourbon. His eyes were slightly bloodshot, and his phone vibrated relentlessly on the table next to his plate, a clear sign of the massive underground gambling debts my forensic team had already uncovered. Sitting quietly beside him was his wife, Naomi. She was a stunning African-American woman, with sharp, incredibly observant eyes, dressed in an elegant emerald-sheath dress. Naomi was the only person in this entire family who possessed any actual intelligence, and she was currently watching the room with the quiet, calculating intensity of someone playing a very dangerous game. At the absolute head of the long mahogany table sat Patricia. She was 60 years old, dripping in diamonds, purchased entirely with her late husband. Wealth, her face pulled tight by highly expensive cosmetic procedures. And sitting directly to Patricia right, occupying the exact chair that had been mine for the last 5 consecutive years, was Vanessa. The young attorney wore a tailored designer dress that cost more than the average person made in a month, sipping her wine with a look of extreme self-satisfaction. The loud laughter abruptly died the exact second my sensible scuffed work heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Bradley noticed me first. He leaned back in his chair, draping his arm casually over the back of Vanessa's seat, a cruel smirk forming on his lips. Patricia set down her wineglass with a sharp, deliberate clink that echoed across the quiet room. She did not offer me a seat. She did not ask the staff to fetch me a plate. She simply looked at my plain gray cardigan and practical dark trousers with absolute, unfiltered revulsion. "I am only here for the silver locket Bradley kept," I stated, keeping my voice perfectly even and entirely devoid of any emotion. "Give it to me, and I will leave you to your evening." Patricia let out a high, breathy laugh that grated violently against my ears. "Bradley did not invite you here to fetch your cheap little trinkets, Cassidy. I told him to invite you. I wanted you to come here tonight, so you could see exactly what a proper partner for my son looks like before you try to drag out this divorce with any unnecessary, greedy demands." She gestured grandly toward Vanessa, who smiled with an infuriatingly false sense of modesty, adjusting her posture to look even more regal. "Vanessa is a rising star in the legal world." Patricia continued, her voice ringing off the vaulted ceilings of the dining room. "She comes from a highly respectable background. She understands corporate law, high finance, and the rigorous, demanding nature of Bradley professional circle. We spent 5 long years trying to polish you, Cassidy, but you cannot force a stray dog to become a show horse." I stood perfectly still, letting her words wash over me. I did not clench my fists. I did not let a single tear form in my eyes. I simply stared at her, cataloging every single insult for the day of reckoning that was rapidly approaching. "You grew up bouncing around foster homes with absolutely nothing." Patricia spat, her tone growing increasingly vicious. "You have no pedigree, no ambition, and no class. You sitting at a desk, typing numbers into a computer all day, brings absolutely zero value to the Reed legacy. You are a charity case we tolerated because Bradley felt sorry for you, but he is a managing director now. He is stepping into the elite tier of society." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, unforgiving slits. She slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table. "This family needs a brilliant lawyer, not some lowly admin girl." A thick, heavy silence settled over the dining room. Bradley took a slow sip of his wine, clearly relishing the verbal execution his mother was delivering. Trent snickered quietly into his bourbon glass, shaking his head at my apparent pathetic state. Vanessa looked at me with an expression of overwhelming triumph, believing she had secured her place in their wealthy dynasty. They all thought they had completely broken me. They thought bringing up my painful childhood in the foster care system would shatter my confidence and force me to run away in tears. They wanted to remind me of my lowly place in their fabricated social hierarchy. But I was not looking at Patricia, and I was not looking at Bradley. My eyes briefly flicked over to Naomi. The beautiful, sharp-minded woman had not touched her food. She was staring directly at me, her face completely neutral, but her hands were tightly gripping the white cloth napkin in her lap. She was the only one not laughing. She was the only one who recognized that cornering an animal with nothing to lose was a massive, fatal mistake. I finally shifted my gaze back to Patricia. I offered her a slow, terrifyingly calm smile that caused her self-righteous expression to falter for just a fraction of a second. "You are absolutely right, Patricia," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a chilling authority that I normally reserved for hostile witnesses in federal court. "This family is going to need a brilliant lawyer very, very soon." I turned my attention to Bradley, holding my hand out. "The locket? Now." For a brief moment, Bradley looked unsettled by my complete lack of emotional distress. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out the tarnished silver chain, and tossed it carelessly across the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right at the edge. I picked up the necklace, enclosing the cool metal safely in my palm. I did not say another word. I turned on my heel and walked out of the sprawling suburban mansion, leaving them to their arrogant delusions. They had just thrown gasoline onto a fire they could not possibly hope to extinguish. I had barely taken 2 steps toward the arched entryway when a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. Before I could react, Trent stepped directly into my path, completely blocking the exit. The overpowering stench of expensive bourbon and stale cigar smoke radiated from him. With a sudden vicious swipe, he snatched the silver locket right out of my palm, dangling it high in the air above my head. His bloodshot eyes were wide with malicious amusement, completely fueled by the alcohol and the toxic energy of his mother dining room. "Not so fast, you pathetic little mouse," Trent slurred, a cruel grin spreading across his flushed face. "You think you can just strut in here, insult my mother, and walk out with your pride intact? I saw that rusted 5-year-old piece of junk sedan you parked at the edge of the driveway. It is an absolute embarrassment to have that eyesore sitting on our property. You are a joke, Cassidy. You always have been." The entire table erupted into laughter. Patricia clapped her manicured hands together, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of her eldest son bullying a woman he deemed beneath him. Vanessa let out a high-pitched giggle, leaning closer to Bradley, as if watching an entertaining theatrical performance. "If you think you are so tough," Trent challenged, stepping closer to me, waving the locket tauntingly, "why do you not take us to court? Go ahead, sue my brother for half of his assets. I dare you. Let us see how far your pathetic administrative salary gets you when you try to hire a lawyer to go up against Cole and Partners. You would be bankrupt before the first filing." I kept my expression entirely neutral, staring blankly at Trent's chest, rather than giving him the satisfaction of looking up at the stolen necklace. I was calculating the exact legal definition of theft and coercion, filing away the details of his aggressive physical contact for the inevitable criminal charges that would follow his impending financial ruin. Bradley pushed his chair back and stood up. He picked up a freshly poured, oversized crystal glass of deep red vintage wine from the table. He walked slowly toward me, his expensive leather shoes completely silent against the hardwood floor. He stopped right beside his brother, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "My brother is absolutely right," Cassidy Bradley said, his voice smooth and incredibly dangerous. "You have gotten entirely too comfortable, speaking out of turn. You need a harsh reminder of exactly where you stand in the real world." Without a single ounce of hesitation, Bradley tilted his wrist. The dark, crimson wine poured directly from the crystal glass, splashing violently across the front of my gray cardigan and completely soaking my white blouse. The cold liquid seeped instantly through the fabric, chilling my skin. The dark red stains bloomed like open wounds across my chest. The dining room exploded into a chorus of arrogant, cruel laughter. Patricia let out a delighted gasp, bringing her hand to her mouth in mock shock while her eyes gleamed with absolute malice. Vanessa smiled smugly, crossing her arms over her chest, thoroughly enjoying my public humiliation. Even the housekeeper quickly averted her eyes, silently retreating into the kitchen to avoid witnessing the brutal degradation. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I did not try to wipe the dripping wine from my ruined clothes. I stood perfectly still, letting the freezing liquid drip down my front and onto the pristine hardwood floor. My mind was a steel trap. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg for mercy. I refused to give them a single drop of satisfaction. Vanessa stood up gracefully and walked over to the mahogany console table near the entryway. She picked up a crisp, legal-size document and a heavy gold pen. She walked over to me, her designer heels clicking rhythmically, and held the document out. "This is a comprehensive waiver of marital assets," Vanessa stated, her tone dripping with professional arrogance. "It legally strips you of any right to claim alimony, spousal support, or any equity in the penthouse. It is completely binding. Bradley had me draft it this morning." Bradley took the silver locket from Trent, hand-holding the delicate chain between his fingers. He dangled my mother, only keepsake, right in front of my face. "Here are your options," Cassidy Bradley said coldly. "You take this gold pen, you sign your name on the dotted line, and you give up any ridiculous, greedy delusion you have about touching my money. If you do that, I will give you back this cheap little piece of junk metal. If you refuse to sign, I will drop this locket down the garbage disposal tonight and grind it into silver dust. The choice is yours." I looked at the document in Vanessa's hand. My highly trained legal mind instantly dissected the situation. Signing a legal waiver while covered in spilled wine, surrounded by hostile individuals and under the explicit threat of property destruction, was the textbook definition of signing under duress. Any competent judge would throw this document out of court in less than 30 seconds. It was legally worthless. It was garbage. But Bradley and Vanessa were too blinded by their own narcissism and false sense of supremacy to realize they were committing a massive procedural error. They wanted me to sign it to stroke their egos. They wanted absolute submission. I reached out and took the gold pen from Vanessa's hand. I did not say a word. I pressed the document against the hard surface of the console table and signed my name with a perfectly steady, fluid motion. I handed the pen back to Vanessa, who snatched the document away with a triumphant, victorious smirk. Bradley laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. He did not hand the locket to me. He simply dropped it onto the floor, letting it clatter against the hardwood right beside my wet, sensible shoes. "Good girl," Bradley sneered, turning his back on me to walk back to the dining table. "Now get out of my mother house before you stain the rugs." I slowly bent down and picked up the silver locket. I brushed a single speck of dust from its surface and clasped it tightly in my hand. As I stood back up, my eyes locked directly onto Naomi. She was still sitting at the table, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Her dark eyes were blazing with a silent, intense fury directed entirely at her husband and his repulsive family. She gave me a fraction of a nod, an almost imperceptible movement that confirmed exactly what I needed to know. The alliance was formed. I turned around and walked out into the cold night air, my wine-soaked clothes clinging to my skin. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won the war by winning a single pathetic battle. They had absolutely no idea that I was already drafting the federal indictments that would tear their entire empire down to the ground. Before my hand could even brush the heavy brass handle of the front door, a sudden and violent crash echoed from the dining room behind me. The sharp sound of shattering crystal cut through the arrogant laughter of the Reed family. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. Naomi had suddenly knocked over a massive glass water pitcher, sending an absolute tidal wave of ice water cascading across the mahogany table and directly onto Trent's lap. Trent jumped up, cursing loudly, as the freezing water soaked his expensive trousers. Patricia shrieked frantically, pulling her diamond bracelets away from the spreading puddle. In the midst of the engineered chaos, Naomi stumbled backward, her emerald dress swishing as she forcefully grabbed my arm to steady herself. Her fingers dug into my wine-soaked cardigan with an iron grip. "I am so clumsy tonight," Naomi announced, her voice pitched loud enough for the entire room to hear over Trent's aggressive swearing. "Let me help you get that wine stain treated immediately, Cassidy. The kitchen staff has club soda. Come with me right now." Before Patricia could object or Bradley could issue another cruel command, Naomi practically dragged me out of the dining room and pushed me through the house. The heavy swinging doors of the chef kitchen, the thick doors swung shut behind us, instantly cutting off the noise of the chaotic dining room. The kitchen was completely empty. The catering staff had already retreated to the service quarters to avoid Patricia's wrath. The second we were isolated in the gleaming stainless steel room, the clumsy, apologetic facade dropped from Naomi's face entirely. There was no mocking smile. There was no trace of the subservient daughter-in-law Patricia demanded her to be. Naomi stood tall, her dark eyes blazing with a fierce, calculating intelligence. She marched over to the industrial sink, grabbed a clean white cloth, and turned on the cold water tap. She shoved the damp cloth into my hands, but she did not step back. She closed the distance between us, lowering her voice to an urgent, razor-sharp whisper. I know you just signed that garbage waiver to get your mother necklace back, Naomi said, her tone dead serious. But you need to listen to me very carefully right now. Do not sign a single legal document in front of a real judge. Do not let them bully you into a quick settlement. I looked at her, maintaining my neutral expression, but my forensic mind was instantly on high alert. I wiped the wet cloth across my ruined blouse, waiting for her to continue. Naomi leaned in closer, her eyes darting quickly to the swinging doors to ensure nobody was eavesdropping. They are bleeding you dry, Cassidy, Naomi whispered fiercely. They are moving capital faster than you can imagine. I work from home 2 days a week, and I observe everything that happens in this miserable house. Last Tuesday, I saw Bradley receiving secure courier packages. He bypassed his corporate office and had them delivered directly here to Patricia Estate to avoid any digital tracking. I walked past the study and saw the return addresses before Trent shredded the envelopes. They were heavily sealed documents from the Cayman Islands. My heart executed a slow, deliberate beat. The Cayman Islands, the absolute holy grail of offshore tax evasion and corporate money laundering. I had already instructed my team at Apex Forensics to look into his international routing numbers, but having physical confirmation of courier deliveries to his mother's suburban address was a massive operational breakthrough. It meant Bradley was arrogant enough to bring physical paper trails into his personal life. They are hiding major assets. Naomi continued, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Bradley and Vanessa are setting up offshore shell companies. Trent is helping them route the paperwork because he owes massive debts to underground bookies. They are structuring an entire financial labyrinth to force you out of this marriage completely empty-handed. They want you to walk away with nothing while they sit on millions. I kept my face perfectly still, absorbing the tactical intelligence she was handing me. Naomi was a brilliant woman. She was a former human resources executive who had given up her career to marry Trent only to realize she had married into a family of absolute sociopaths. She was trapped in the same gilded cage I had just been thrown out of, but she was entirely awake to their corruption. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a breath. You are married to his brother. If they go down for offshore fraud, Trent goes down with them. Naomi let out a bitter, humorless scoff. Trent is already draining my personal savings to cover his gambling losses. He thinks I do not notice the missing funds. This family is a toxic, rotting, sinking ship. Cassidy. They view anyone who is not a blood relative as a disposable asset. They treat you like garbage because of your background, and they treat me like a silent accessory. I refuse to go down with them. I need a way out, and I know you are much smarter than you let them believe. I see the way you watch them. You are planning something. I looked deeply into her dark, intelligent eyes. She was handing me the exact physical evidence vector I needed to tear Bradley Offshore Empire to shreds. She was taking a massive risk by speaking against the Reed family inside their own fortress. We were two outsiders brought into their wealthy dynasty, deeply underestimated and fiercely determined to survive. I took a slow breath, dropping my voice to match her secretive tone. The Cayman Islands documents. Do you know where Trent and Bradley keep the shredded remains or the digital backups? Naomi nodded slightly, her expression hardening with absolute resolve. Bradley installed a hidden biometric safe in Patricia home office. I do not have the access code, but I know exactly when he accesses it. He thinks he is untouchable. A cold, calculating smile finally touched the corners of my mouth. I dropped the damp white cloth onto the granite countertop. They are arrogant, Naomi, and arrogance breeds fatal mistakes. Thank you for the water. Naomi gave me a single affirming nod. She stepped back instantly, rearranging her features into the polite, concerned sister-in-law. She pushed the swinging doors open, leading me back out into the grand hallway. The noise of the dining room filtered back into the air. Bradley was still laughing with Vanessa, completely oblivious to the fact that his own sister-in-law had just handed me the final nail for his coffin. I walked straight out the front door and into the freezing rain. As I started the engine of my sensible sedan, I pulled out my secure phone. The Cayman Islands connection was confirmed. The physical safe was located. I shifted the car into gear, driving away from the sprawling suburban estate. The pieces were perfectly aligning, and the federal trap was finally ready to snap shut. I pushed the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen open and stepped back into the formal dining room. The chaotic aftermath of the spilled water was still highly visible. A disgruntled staff member was frantically mopping the mahogany floor while Trent continued to complain loudly about his ruined trousers. Patricia was fanning herself with a linen napkin, her face flushed with intense irritation. Bradley and Vanessa were whispering to each other, their heads bent close together in a sickening display of manufactured intimacy. They looked up the exact second I entered the room, their expressions instantly hardening back into that familiar arrogant condescension. They fully expected me to slink along the wall, thoroughly defeated, completely humiliated by the dark wine soaking my clothes, and beg for the return of my property. They anticipated a broken woman who had just signed away her financial future under extreme duress. I did not break my stride. I walked directly toward the head of the table, my sensible scuffed shoes stepping right over the damp, expensive rugs without a single ounce of hesitation. Bradley leaned back in his leather chair, a smug, victorious grin forming on his face. He picked up the silver locket from the table, dangling it loosely from his index finger, preparing to deliver another patronizing lecture to the pathetic wife he was throwing away. He opened his mouth to speak, highly likely to demand another display of subservience. Before handing over the cheap piece of metal, I did not give him the chance. With a movement so sudden and precise that it left him entirely stunned, I reached across the expensive china plates and snatched the silver chain right out of his hand. The metal link scraped sharply against his skin. Bradley actually gasped, recoiling backward as if he had been burned, his arrogant smirk vanishing in an absolute instant. Vanessa let out a shocked noise, spilling a few drops of her own wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. "You have your garbage legal waiver," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority across the silent room. "And I have what belongs to me. Do not ever attempt to hold my mother memory hostage again." Patricia shot up from her chair, her face contorting with absolute unfiltered fury. "How dare you snatch things in my house? You ungrateful, classless little rat! You are nothing but a parasite we finally managed to scrape off our shoes. Get out of my sight before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I did not even blink at her frantic screaming. I simply secured the silver locket safely inside my pocket, turned my back on the entire room, and walked down the grand corridor with my head held high. Patricia continued to shout vicious insults, her shrill voice bouncing off the vaulted ceilings, calling me every degrading name her wealthy, entitled vocabulary could summon. I let her scream. Her anger was nothing but the desperate noise of a woman who had no idea her entire fraudulent empire was about to burn to the ground. I pushed the heavy double doors open and stepped out into the freezing suburban night. The rain was still pouring heavily as I slid into the driver's seat of my 5-year-old sedan. I locked the doors and stared straight ahead through the water-slicked windshield. Slowly, the corners of my mouth curled upward. A sharp, highly predatory smile broke across my face, completely transforming my features. I had walked into that sprawling estate as a victim, and I had walked out holding the exact key required to destroy Bradley Reed and his entire corrupt bloodline. I reached into the hidden compartment of my bag and retrieved my secure, encrypted device. The biometric scanner recognized my thumbprint instantly. I bypassed the standard routing protocols and opened a direct line to my senior operations manager at Apex Forensics. Cameron answered on the very first ring. We hit a massive encrypted firewall on the offshore routing. He is using highly sophisticated randomized shell company identifiers. We need a geographic anchor to break the cipher, or it could take us months to crack the code. "I have your anchor," I said, my voice buzzing with pure adrenaline and absolute clarity. "Narrow the search parameters to the Cayman Islands. He is receiving physical courier packages delivered directly to his mother's suburban estate to avoid corporate mail logs and federal oversight. Trace the routing numbers tied to the Cayman registry and cross-reference them with the physical delivery manifest going to Patricia residential address." The sound of rapid aggressive typing flooded the secure line. "Cayman Islands confirmed." Cameron replied, his tone shifting into high gear as the data began to populate. "Applying the geographic anchor to the decryption algorithm right now. Director, the firewall is collapsing. We are in. The shell companies are opening up like a book. He is moving millions." I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes as the satisfaction washed over me. Bradley thought he was a financial genius. He thought hiding physical documents at his mother house made him untraceable. He failed to realize that the most dangerous threat to his freedom was not the federal government. It was the quiet, observant women he brought into his family and treated like absolute garbage. Naomi had just handed me the master key to the vault, download every single ledger I ordered softly into the phone, map the entire money laundering network, flag every transfer Vanessa authorized, and tag every account Trent used to cover his gambling debts. Build the entire web. "Understood," Director Cameron said. "This is going to be a bloodbath." I shifted the car into gear, my headlights cutting through the dark, rainy street. We are about to show the Reed family exactly what a classless administrative assistant can really do. The intelligence gathering phase was officially complete. It was time to start setting the legal traps that would ensure none of them ever saw the outside of a federal prison cell. The morning after the disastrous Sunday dinner, I sat behind the massive glass desk in my actual office. Located on the 42nd floor of a secure high-rise in downtown Chicago, the headquarters of Apex Forensics was a fortress of federal data analysis. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the financial district, a stark contrast to the miserable, cramped cubicle Bradley believed I occupied. The screens in front of me were illuminated with cascading rows of offshore banking data, cross-referencing the Cayman Island routing numbers Naomi had so brilliantly exposed. We were mapping Bradley Reed and his massive money laundering operation down to the very last digital cent. Suddenly, a red notification light flashed across my secure communications console. My chief of staff, a highly intelligent and ruthless former federal agent named Lauren, stepped into my office. Her expression was a mixture of deep professional focus and sharp amusement. "Director, we have an incoming call on the external cover line," Lauren stated, holding a sleek tablet. "The caller ID is verified as Bradley Reed." He routed the call through his corporate office directly to the main switchboard of Oakwood Data Solutions. Oakwood Data Solutions was the meticulously crafted shell company I used as my employment cover. To the outside world, and specifically to my husband, it was a mediocre low-level administrative firm that processed mindless data entry for mid-tier clients. It was the perfect boring alibi to explain my $40,000 salary and my flexible remote working hours. Bradley had clearly done a quick internet search this morning to locate their human resources department. A cold, razor-sharp smile touched the corners of my mouth. He was not satisfied with throwing wine on me and kicking me out into the rain. He wanted to ensure I was completely destitute. He wanted to sever my only supposed source of income so I would have absolutely no resources to hire an attorney. It was a classic, highly predictable move for a corporate narcissist. "Put him on the secure speaker," I ordered, leaning back in my leather ergonomic chair. "I will monitor the audio. Answer the call as the head of human resources. Let us see exactly how far he is willing to go to destroy a life he already thinks is pathetic." Lauren tapped the screen, routing the audio directly into my office. She cleared her throat instantly, shifting her demeanor into that of a stressed mid-level corporate manager. "Oakwood Data Solutions. Human Resources. This is Lauren speaking. How may I help you?" The smooth, heavily polished voice of my husband filled my office. Bradley was using his absolute best investment banker tone. It was the exact voice he used when convincing wealthy clients to hand over their life savings. It dripped with manufactured charm and false sincerity. "Good morning, Lauren Bradley," began, pausing perfectly for dramatic effect. "My name is Bradley Reed. I am the managing director at a major financial institution here in the city. I am calling regarding one of your data entry clerks, Cassidy Reed, or I suppose she might be going by her maiden name now." Lauren feigned a polite, professional curiosity. "Yes, Mr. Reed. Cassidy is one of our remote administrative employees. Is there an emergency we need to be aware of?" "I am afraid there is a severe situation," Bradley said, lowering his voice to sound incredibly grave and deeply burdened. "I am currently going through a very difficult divorce with Cassidy. I am not calling to bring my personal drama into your workplace, but I felt a strong moral and ethical obligation to warn your company before you suffer a massive liability." I rested my chin on my hands, thoroughly enjoying the performance. He was painting himself as the noble, wealthy savior, warning the poor, defenseless small business. "What kind of liability, Mr. Reed?" Lauren asked, injecting the perfect amount of rising panic into her voice. Bradley let out a heavy, manufactured sigh. "After separation proceedings, my legal team uncovered that Cassidy has been systematically siphoning thousands of dollars from my secure accounts. She has a severe, undocumented gambling problem and a history of erratic financial behavior. She completely drained our joint savings before I could secure them. Knowing that she handles sensitive client data for your firm, I could not in good conscience let her continue working there without warning you. A woman desperate for cash will absolutely steal client credit card numbers or sell proprietary data. I am just trying to protect your business from her incoming legal fallout." It was a master class in psychological manipulation and defamation. He was accusing me of the exact financial crimes he was currently committing with his offshore shell companies. He was projecting his own massive fraud onto me to ensure I lost my pathetic $40,000 job. I pressed the mute button on my microphone, looking directly at Lauren through the glass partition. "Give him exactly what he wants," I instructed firmly. "Fire me. Make him feel like a god." Lauren nodded, taking a sharp, audible gasp into the telephone receiver. "Oh my God, Mr. Reed, this is a severe violation of our corporate security protocols. We cannot have an active liability like this handling our data entry batches. I am absolutely horrified, but I am so incredibly grateful you took the time out of your busy schedule to alert us. We have strict zero-tolerance policies for financial misconduct. I know it is a difficult decision, Bradley replied smoothly, masking the immense greedy satisfaction in his tone. But you have to protect your assets. She is highly unstable. I will process her immediate termination today, Lauren promised, sounding entirely frantic. We will lock her out of our remote servers within the hour. Thank you again, Mr. Reed. You likely just saved our company from a major disaster. You are very welcome, Lauren. Have a good day, Bradley said, and the line clicked dead. The secure speaker beeped twice. The quiet hum of the climate control system filled my office. Lauren looked at me through the glass, a sharp, brilliant smile breaking across her face. My entire forensic team, who had been monitoring the internal feed, let out a collective icy laugh. Bradley Reed had just successfully bullied a fake human resources manager into firing his wife from a job that did not actually exist. He felt entirely invincible. He thought he had completely isolated me, stripped me of my only income, and guaranteed my absolute ruin. 10 minutes later, the burner phone sitting on my desk vibrated violently. The screen lit up with a new text message. It was from Bradley. I did not even have to unlock the device to read the notification banner displaying his cruel, arrogant words. Just heard the tragic news about your little data entry job, the message read. Such an absolute shame they had to let you go. A homeless, unemployed, pathetic liability. Good luck finding a cardboard box to sleep in tonight. You really are nothing without me. Do not even bother begging for a settlement. You are entirely finished. I picked up the phone, staring at the glowing text. He wanted to break my spirit. He wanted me to feel the crushing weight of absolute poverty and social rejection. He wanted me to crawl back on my hands and knees, begging for the $10,000 settlement his arrogant lawyer had drawn up. I locked the screen and tossed the burner phone carelessly onto the glass desk. I did not reply. Silence was always the most terrifying weapon against a narcissist. I turned my attention back to the massive digital displays illuminating my office. The offshore routing numbers from the Cayman Islands were finally finalizing their decryption sequences. The names he used to launder millions of dollars were popping up on my screen, complete with digital signatures and time-stamped wire transfers. Bradley thought he had just destroyed my life. He had absolutely no idea that while he was busy playing petty office politics, I was actively drafting the federal indictments that would seize his entire investment portfolio, freeze his offshore assets, and guarantee he spent the next 20 years of his life in a federal penitentiary. The trap was set perfectly. It was time to invite him to the final mediation and hand him the pen that would sign away his freedom. I walked into the sprawling glass-enclosed lobby of Cole and Partners exactly on time. I deliberately wore the same gray cardigan from the Sunday dinner, carefully washed but visibly worn, paired with scuffed flat shoes and a cheap canvas tote bag. I needed to look like a woman who had spent the last week sleeping on a friend's sofa and crying over her lost administrative job. Deceptionist. A woman dripping in designer labels looked at me with undisguised disdain before directing me to Conference Room A on the 50th floor. I kept my head down and my shoulders slumped, playing the role of the utterly defeated wife to absolute perfection. The conference room was an intimidating display of corporate wealth designed to psychologically crush anyone who walked through the door. A massive mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping, vertigo-inducing view of the city. Sitting on the opposite side of the table was my husband Bradley, looking effortlessly arrogant in a navy-tailored suit. Beside him sat Vanessa, holding a sleek tablet and wearing a triumphant, predatory smirk. And at the exact head of the table sat Jonathan Cole. He was a senior partner whose reputation for ruthlessly dismantling spouses in high-asset divorces was legendary in the city. He wore a custom watch that cost more than my supposed annual salary and looked at me as if I were a mild, unpleasant inconvenience he had to squash before his afternoon golf game. "You brought no legal representation to this mediation," Mrs. Reed Jonathan Cole stated. His voice was a deep, resonant boom, heavily practiced and designed solely to intimidate opposing counsel. He did not offer me a seat. He did not offer a professional handshake. He simply folded his manicured hands on the polished wood and stared me down. I pulled out a heavy leather chair and sat down slowly, keeping my hands tightly clasped in my lap to hide their absolute steadiness. "I cannot afford an attorney right now," I said, making my voice sound incredibly small and brittle. "Bradley informed me that he froze our joint accounts and I recently lost my job. I have no income. I just want to know how we can resolve this quickly and fairly." Bradley actually chuckled out loud, exchanging a highly amused, knowing glance with Vanessa. Jonathan Cole did not smile. Instead, He slid a thin, single-page document across the expansive mahogany table. It came to rest right in front of my cheap canvas bag. Fair is a highly subjective term in a court of law, Cassidy Cole said smoothly, leaning forward to dominate my physical space. However, my client is a profoundly generous man. Despite the fact that you contributed virtually nothing of monetary value to this 5-year union, Bradley is willing to offer you a one-time lump sum settlement of $10,000. This is a courtesy payment, a charitable donation to help you secure a small apartment in a lower-income neighborhood and get back on your feet. $10,000. I stared at the crisp, white paper, letting my eyes widen in manufactured shock. Bradley had just routed $4 million through a shell company in the Cayman Islands yesterday morning, and he was offering me a taxable $10,000 buyout. It was so profoundly insulting that I almost broke character to laugh right in his face. Instead, I let my lower lip tremble visibly. But I put $80,000 of my own life savings into the down payment for the penthouse. I protested weakly, letting a note of rising panic slip into my tone. And $10,000 will barely cover first and last month's rent. I have nothing else. Vanessa leaned forward, taking over the psychological assault with aggressive, youthful enthusiasm. She clearly wanted to impress her senior partner by destroying me. You do not understand how the legal system operates, Cassidy. That $80,000 was legally classified as a non-refundable gift under the secondary addendum you signed 5 years ago. If you refuse this incredibly generous offer and attempt to take Bradley to court, you will be utterly destroyed. We will file immediate motions for summary judgment. We will bury you in the discovery phase. Do you have any idea what it costs to compel financial disclosures in a contested divorce? Jonathan Cole nodded seamlessly, backing up his junior associate to create a united wall of intimidation. You are looking at a minimum retainer of $25,000 just to get a competent family law attorney to return your phone call. The exact moment you file a petition, we will countersue for legal fees due to frivolous litigation. We will demand a full forensic accounting of your personal expenses, which will cost another $30,000 that the judge will force you to pay when you lose. You are currently unemployed. You are completely broke. If you walk into a courtroom against this firm, you will not just walk out with nothing. You will walk out owing us hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal debt. You will be paying off this divorce for the rest of your natural life. I sat in silence, listening to them barrage me with legal terminology. My internal forensic mind was rapidly analyzing every single threat. They were actively utilizing predatory intimidation tactics, banking entirely on my supposed ignorance. They assumed terms like summary judgment and discovery phase would terrify an uneducated data entry clerk into immediate submission. They were gaslighting me, maliciously manipulating the financial reality of the legal system to force a rapid, uncontested signature. It was a blatant violation of ethical conduct, and Jonathan Cole was risking his entire senior partnership by participating in such a transparently coercive mediation. Take the $10,000, Cassidy Bradley said, leaning back and casually inspecting his fingernails. It is $10,000 more than you actually deserve. Take the check, sign the waiver, and disappear from my city. If you choose to be stubborn and fight me, I will personally make sure you never recover financially. I will ruin you so completely that you will regret the day you ever met me. I looked down at the document, letting a single carefully produced tear fall onto the polished mahogany table. I reached into my cheap canvas bag and pulled out a standard ballpoint pen. I let my hand shake visibly as I hovered the pen over the signature line. Cole, Vanessa, and Bradley all leaned forward slightly, their eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. The trap was set perfectly. They thought they were seconds away from a total devastating victory. They had absolutely no idea I was about to ask for the one specific document that would send every single one of them to federal prison. I let the standard ballpoint pen slip from my trembling fingers. It clattered loudly against the polished mahogany table, rolling to a stop right next to their insulting $10,000 settlement offer. I squeezed my eyes shut, buried my face in my hands, and let my shoulders heave with loud, ragged sobs. The sound of my manufactured despair echoed violently in the cavernous, soundproofed conference room. It was an absolutely flawless performance. I channeled every single ounce of the stress, exhaustion, and betrayal from the past week into this singular theatrical display of total heartbreak. Oh, for God's sake, Cassidy! Bradley groaned, his voice dripping with intense irritation and profound disgust. Pull yourself together. You are acting like a child. Vanessa let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh, crossing her arms over her chest and rolling her eyes at the ceiling. Jonathan Cole simply tapped his expensive custom watch, clearly annoyed that my emotional breakdown was cutting into his highly valuable billable hours. I gasped. pulling my hands away from my face and looking at Bradley with wide, tear-filled eyes. I just cannot believe 5 years meant absolutely nothing to you. I supported you. I stayed out of your way. I gave you everything, and you just replace me and throw me out into the rain like garbage. Mrs. Reed. Jonathan Cole interrupted, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute boredom. Emotional displays will not increase the financial settlement offer currently on the table. My client has drawn a firm line. You need to sign the waiver. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled, cheap paper tissue. I dabbed at my eyes, letting my breath hitch perfectly. I do not want more money, I whispered, my voice cracking with fragile vulnerability. I know I am completely beaten. You have all the power, Bradley. You have the aggressive lawyers. You have the penthouse. You have the wealth. I just have a meaningless desk job that I lost because you decided to ruin my life. I have absolutely nothing left to fight you with. I know I cannot afford to take you to court. Bradley leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, incredibly self-satisfied smile spreading across his handsome face. He loved hearing me admit defeat. He fed on the absolute submission in my voice. Then pick up the pen and sign the document, Cassidy. Bradley said smoothly. Take the $10,000 and walk away. I sniffled, looking down at my lap. I will sign it, I said softly. I will take your settlement, and I will disappear from your life completely today. But I just need one thing from you first, just for my own peace of mind. Jonathan Cole immediately narrowed his eyes, his predatory legal instincts flaring up. We are not negotiating any additional terms, Mrs. Reed. I slowly reached into my faded, cheap canvas tote bag. My fingers brushed past the heavy signal-blocking pouch that contained my encrypted federal ghost phone. I ignored it and found the single crisp document I had printed earlier that morning. I pulled it out with deliberately shaking hands and slid it across the expansive mahogany table, pushing it right next to their settlement offer. It was a standard boilerplate affidavit of financial disclosure. I had intentionally printed it on cheap, low-grade copy paper, making it look exactly like a generic form a desperate, uneducated woman would download for free from a public library computer. What is this trash? Vanessa demanded, leaning forward to inspect the paper with pure, unfiltered disdain. It is just a standard disclosure form, I said, wiping another fake tear from my cheek and looking at Bradley with an expression of pathetic desperation. I printed it out this morning. I just need emotional closure, Bradley. I need to know that my entire marriage was not a complete financial lie. I just need you to sign this swearing under oath that you have not hidden any other money from me, that you truly only have your corporate salary, the penthouse, the cars, and the joint savings you already emptied. I let my voice drop to a pleading, naive whisper. Just swear to me on paper that there are no secret accounts, no hidden millions tucked away somewhere. If you just sign this proving you are telling the truth about your assets, I will sign your settlement right now. I will take the $10,000, and you will never have to see my face ever again. Jonathan Cole immediately reached out and snatched the paper from the table. He scanned the text with his sharp eyes, his jaw tightening. My client is under absolutely no obligation to sign an arbitrary document provided by an unrepresented opposing party. We will not be signing this, Bradley. But Bradley was not looking at his senior counsel. He was looking directly at me. He saw a broken, pathetic, hysterical woman who simply needed a tiny, completely meaningless concession to surrender her entire life. He saw an incredibly easy way out that avoided months of highly annoying, drawn-out legal paperwork. Let me see it, Jonathan Bradley commanded, extending his hand toward the older lawyer. Bradley, as your retained counsel, I strongly advise against signing any legal document that my firm did not personally draft. Cole warned, his voice low and serious. Bradley arrogantly snatched the paper out of Cole's hand anyway. It is just a generic internet disclosure form, Jonathan Bradley scoffed, glancing carelessly over the cheap paper. She is just being overly emotional and needs a piece of paper to make her feel better about walking away with absolute pocket change. She genuinely thinks I am hoarding some massive secret fortune like a movie villain. He laughed, a cruel, echoing sound that filled the room. Look at her, Jonathan. She is completely broken. If my signature on this useless piece of paper gets her out of my life today, without a lengthy court battle, I am signing it. Vanessa leaned over Bradley's shoulder, peering at the document. She wanted to prove her worth to the senior partner, completely missing the massive federal trap hidden beneath the mundane legal formatting. It is just standard boilerplate language, Vanessa whispered confidently, confirming her boyfriend's arrogant assumption. It just affirms his current declared visible assets. It has no real teeth. It gets her out of our hair today. I kept my head down, staring intently at my lap, biting the inside of my cheek so hard, I tasted metallic copper just to prevent a victorious, predatory smile from breaking through my facade. They were so utterly blinded by their own superiority and classism. They thought I was a naive, heartbroken wife, begging for a scrap of emotional closure. They had absolutely no comprehension of the forensic nightmare they were actively walking into. The affidavit of financial disclosure was not just a piece of paper. It was a legally binding document sworn under penalty of perjury. By signing it, Bradley was legally swearing to the federal government that he possessed no other financial assets. He was deliberately omitting the $4 million actively sitting in his Cayman Island shell companies, the exact accounts my team at Apex Forensics had already mapped and verified. The second he put his signature on that line, it ceased to be a messy civil divorce dispute. It became a highly documented, undeniable federal crime. Bradley picked up the heavy gold pen from the table. I held my breath, playing the role of the shattered victim, while the forensic accountant inside me watched the executioner raise the axe over his own head. Jonathan Cole made one final desperate attempt to assert his authority as senior counsel. He reached his hand across the expansive mahogany table, his heavy gold cufflinks catching the harsh overhead light, trying to physically pull the cheap piece of paper away from his arrogant client. I am explicitly advising you against this. Bradley Cole warned, his deep voice dropping to a dangerous, rigid register. You do not sign unverified financial disclosures in a divorce mediation. We have a highly structured legal strategy. Do not deviate from it just to satisfy her emotional demands. Bradley did not even look at his lawyer. He simply pulled the document entirely out of Cole's reach, flattening it onto the table with a sharp, dismissive slap of his hand. Bradley possessed the exact kind of blind, impenetrable arrogance that destroyed empires. He paid Jonathan Cole a massive retainer, which meant he viewed the brilliant litigator not as a trusted advisor but as a highly paid servant. In Bradley's mind, he was the smartest man in every single room he entered. He was an elite investment banker who manipulated global markets. He genuinely believed it was absolutely impossible for a woman who wore scuffed flats and carried a canvas tote bag to outsmart him. Vanessa leaned closer to Bradley, resting her manicured hand lightly on his tailored shoulder. She looked at Jonathan Cole with a thinly veiled expression of defiant superiority. With all due respect, Jonathan, Vanessa purred, her voice dripping with the reckless overconfidence of a junior attorney desperate to prove her worth. We are talking about a generic internet printout. It is a completely standard form affirming that Bradley has fully disclosed his domestic checking accounts, his retirement fund, and the penthouse equity. It is legally redundant. If signing this piece of trash gets her to sign the $10,000 settlement right now, we avoid months of discovery and countless billable hours. Let him sign it. It is a strategic win. Cole sat back heavily in his leather chair. He folded his arms across his chest and stared at Vanessa with a look of absolute chilling professional disgust. He knew she was a fool, but he also knew he could not physically force a pen out of his client's hand. If you proceed with this against my direct legal counsel, Cole stated coldly, staring directly at Bradley, I want it explicitly noted for the record that my firm takes zero responsibility for whatever liability this unauthorized document creates. Noted and ignored, Jonathan Bradley sneered, picking up the heavy gold pen that rested beside the settlement offer. He looked down at the affidavit of financial disclosure, his eyes scanning the cheap, slightly wrinkled paper. He let out a loud theatrical sigh, shaking his head as if he were indulging a highly irrational toddler. You really are pathetic, Cassidy Bradley mocked, reading the top lines of the document. An affidavit of financial disclosure under penalty of perjury. You actually printed a sworn oath. Do you genuinely believe I am hiding some massive treasure chest from you? Do you think I have millions of dollars buried in the backyard or locked away in some offshore tax haven? He laughed again, a cruel echoing sound that bounced off the glass walls of the conference room. Vanessa joined in her high-pitched giggle, grating against the quiet tension of the room. They were openly laughing at the exact reality of their criminal enterprise. They were making a joke out of the $4 million, actively sitting in their Cayman Islands shell companies. They were laughing right in the face of the federal investigator, who had already mapped every single one of their illicit wire transfers. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders shaking in a perfectly manufactured display of quiet, defeated weeping. I just need to know the truth, I whispered, letting my voice crack with fragile desperation. I just need you to swear to it. Fine, Bradley declared, uncapping the gold pen with a sharp, definitive click. I swear to you, Cassidy. I swear to the courts. I swear to whoever you want. I possess absolutely zero undisclosed financial assets. My wealth is entirely visible and thoroughly documented. I have nothing to hide from you. He brought the pen down to the paper. I watched from beneath my eyelashes as the dark ink bled into the cheap fiber of the page. Bradley filled out the asset declaration boxes with aggressive sweeping strokes, drawing bold lines through the sections asking for international holdings, corporate equity, and offshore trusts. He was intentionally legally declaring those assets did not exist. He reached the bottom of the page and signed his name with a massive, arrogant flourish. Vanessa, wanting to cement her role as the victorious legal mastermind of the day, reached into her designer briefcase. She pulled out her official state notary stamp. "Since this requires a sworn oath, let me make it official for you, Cassidy," Vanessa said sweetly, pressing the heavy stamp down next to Bradley's signature and signing her own name as the acting officer of the court. "We want to make sure you have your precious emotional closure." The heavy thud of the notary stamp hitting the table was the loudest sound in the entire world. It was the sound of a steel trap slamming completely shut. Bradley pushed the signed notarized affidavit across the mahogany table. It stood perfectly to a stop right in front of me. "There you go," he said, tossing the gold pen carelessly next to it. "You have my sworn oath. I am entirely broke beyond what you already know. Now wipe your tears. Pick up that pen and sign my settlement." I stared at the document. Bradley's signature was bold and clear. Vanessa Notary's seal was perfectly legible. I slowly reached out and placed my hand flat over the paper. The transformation was absolute and instantaneous. I stopped crying. My shoulders stopped shaking. The fragile, broken posture I had maintained for the last hour vanished completely. I sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and lifting my chin. I reached up and smoothly wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, my expression shifting from pathetic despair to a mask of freezing, terrifying authority. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bradley's arrogant smile faltered, his brow furrowing in sudden, sharp confusion as he watched the shattered woman he thought he knew evaporate before his eyes. Vanessa slowly lowered her hands, a flicker of genuine unease crossing her polished features. Even Jonathan Cole sat up straighter, his predatory instincts flaring wildly as he registered the severe, calculating intelligence radiating from my posture. I picked up the gold pen. I pulled their $10,000 settlement offer toward me and signed my name on the dotted line with a quick, clinical efficiency. I pushed their document back across the table, maintaining absolute unwavering eye contact with my husband. Then I carefully folded the affidavit of financial disclosure, the federal perjury conviction he had just hand-delivered to me, and slipped it safely into the inner pocket of my canvas bag. "Thank you for your cooperation, Bradley," I said, my voice entirely devoid of the trembling weakness I had used just moments before. It rang out crisp, sharp, and laced with absolute professional finality. "I appreciate you putting your lies on the federal record." I stood up, pushing my chair back with a smooth, controlled motion. I did not wait for him to respond. I did not look back to see the dawning horror attempting to break through his thick wall of arrogance. I turned and walked out of the glass-enclosed conference room, my footsteps clicking with the precise rhythmic authority of a woman who had just secured everything she needed to burn their entire world to ash. The elevator door slid open with a soft metallic chime revealing the top floor of the Central Financial Tower. I stepped out of the glass car and into the true headquarters of Apex Forensics. The air up here was completely different from the suffocating, pretentious atmosphere of Cole and Partners. There were no mahogany tables designed to intimidate. There were no junior associates strutting around with false bravado. There was only the low, constant hum of heavy servers and the sharp, focused energy of the best financial investigators in the country. I swiped my secure identification badge at the reinforced glass doors. They parted, silently granting me access to the nerve center of federal financial oversight. I walked past rows of analysts who were deeply engrossed in complex data mapping. They did not look up. They did not care that I was wearing a cheap gray cardigan and scuffed flats. In this fortress, I was not a disposable administrative assistant or a pathetic, discarded wife. I was the apex predator of the financial ecosystem. I bypassed my private office and headed straight for the main situation room. The entire back wall of the room was a massive, seamless digital display currently illuminating the darkened space with sharp blue and red graphics. Standing in front of the massive screen were Lauren and Cameron, my two most trusted senior operatives. They turned around the second I walked into the room. "We have a massive escalation," Director Cameron stated immediately, his eyes practically burning with adrenaline. He tapped a command onto his tablet, and the digital wall shifted, bringing a complex web of financial transactions into sharp focus. Lauren stepped forward, handing me a freshly printed dossier. I took the affidavit of financial disclosure out of my canvas bag and placed it flat on the conference table. The ink of Bradley's signature was completely dry. The gold foil of Vanessa Notary's stamp gleamed under the tactical lighting. He actually signed it. Lauren said, her voice dropping into a tone of absolute disbelief as she stared at the federal perjury trap resting on the table. He swore under oath that he has no offshore assets. He really is that incredibly stupid. His arrogance is his greatest liability. I replied smoothly, pulling up a chair and looking directly at the data wall. Now show me exactly what he just lied about. Tell me what we found in the Cayman Islands. Cameron swiped his hand across his tablet, and a series of offshore holding companies expanded across the digital screen. You told us to look for hidden marital assets. You told us to find the $4 million he siphoned out of your joint portfolio. We found that money within the first hour of bypassing his encrypted firewall. But when we traced the routing numbers attached to the physical courier packages delivered to Patricia's suburban estate, we triggered a massive anomaly. Cameron highlighted a specific cluster of offshore accounts. Bradley is not just hiding his personal wealth from you, Cassidy. He is actively running a highly sophisticated international money laundering syndicate directly through his investment bank. I sat perfectly still. The magnitude of the revelations settled over me like a heavy, freezing blanket. A cheating husband hiding assets in a divorce was a standard everyday civil dispute. An investment banker running a global money laundering syndicate was a major federal crime that carried decades in prison. Walk me through the exact mechanics of the operation. I ordered, my forensic mind immediately shifting into maximum gear. How is he placing the dirty capital? Lauren pulled up a secondary screen detailing corporate wire transfers. He is using a classic layering technique, but with a highly modern legal shield. Bradley wealthy clients have massive amounts of undocumented illicit cash. They need that money cleaned and integrated into the legitimate market, so they hire a specific law firm to represent them for fabricated corporate consulting services. I narrowed my eyes, instantly connecting the dots. Cole and Partners. Exactly. Lauren confirmed, tapping the screen to highlight Vanessa's name. Vanessa is not just his young, naive mistress. She is the legal architect of the entire laundering cycle. She drafts completely fraudulent consulting contracts between the dirty clients and dummy corporations set up in the Cayman Islands. Because she is a licensed attorney, she claims attorney-client privilege over all the financial communications, creating a massive legal wall that prevents standard auditors from looking too closely at the invoices. And the integration phase, I asked, watching the red lines connect the Cayman accounts back to Chicago. That is where Bradley steps in, Cameron explained. Once the dirty money is safely parked in the Cayman shell, companies Bradley uses his position as a managing director at the investment bank to officially authorize massive capital injections. He brings the laundered money back into the United States as clean foreign investment capital. He puts the money into legitimate hedge funds, taking a massive unreported commission fee for himself and Vanessa on every single transaction. They are cleaning tens of millions of dollars for corrupt corporate entities. I stood up from the table and walked closer to the digital wall, my eyes tracing the undeniable digital footprint of their massive criminal conspiracy. They thought they were completely untouchable. Vanessa believed her law degree provided an impenetrable shield of privilege. Bradley believed his elite status at the bank insulated him from suspicion. They thought they could throw me away like garbage, completely unaware that I had the exact federal authority required to shatter their entire operation. Attorney-client privilege is entirely voided under the crime-fraud exception, I stated coldly, my voice echoing in the quiet situation room. If an attorney actively participates in the commission of a crime, their legal shield completely evaporates. Vanessa just destroyed her entire career. I turned around, looking back at the cheap standard piece of paper resting on the conference table, and Bradley just handed us the final nail for his coffin. By signing that affidavit today, he legally swore to the federal government that he has no connection to those Cayman accounts. When we present the offshore ledgers, proving he controls those exact shell companies, he cannot claim it was a simple accounting error. He committed blatant documented perjury to hide a money laundering syndicate. It elevates the entire case to a federal RICO violation. We have the complete digital trail, Director Cameron said, his expression completely serious. But digital evidence of this magnitude requires physical verification to secure immediate federal arrest warrants without a lengthy grand jury process. We need the encryption keys. We need the physical ledgers he keeps locked away. I crossed my arms over my chest, a slow, predatory smile finally breaking across my face. I thought about the luxurious suburban estate. I thought about the vicious, arrogant woman who had humiliated me at the Sunday dinner table. And then I thought about the brilliant, fiercely observant African-American woman who had deliberately spilled a pitcher of ice water just to hand me the keys to the kingdom. We know exactly where the physical evidence is located, I said smoothly. Bradley keeps a hidden biometric safe inside Patricia's home office. He assumes nobody in that house is smart enough to understand what he is doing. I picked up my secure mobile device from the table. The digital puzzle was solved. Now it was time to execute the physical raid. I needed to get inside that suburban fortress, and I knew exactly who was going to open the door for me. I needed to contact Naomi. I needed to offer her the exact exit strategy she had been desperately waiting for. The meeting took place at a dimly lit high-end botanical cafe on the absolute edge of the city limits, far away from the pretentious downtown spots the Reed family frequented. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a sharp, tailored black trench coat that commanded immediate respect. The oversized gray cardigan and the scuffed flats were gone. I was no longer playing the role of the defeated, discarded wife. I secured a secluded, corner booth shielded by heavy tropical foliage, sipping a black espresso and waiting for the only woman in the Reed dynasty who possessed an actual spine. Naomi walked through the glass doors exactly on time. She wore a flawless, camel-colored wool coat over dark slacks, her posture radiating the kind of effortless, regal authority that Patricia Reed could only dream of buying. Naomi scanned the room with sharp, calculating eyes, spotting me instantly. She did not look surprised by my sudden upgrade in attire, or the predatory, confident way I was sitting. She simply slid into the leather booth opposite me, setting her designer handbag onto the table with a soft, deliberate thud. "You clean up incredibly well," Cassidy Naomi said smoothly, her dark eyes flashing with a profound, knowing intelligence. "I always suspected you were hiding a massive amount of fire beneath that pathetic administrative disguise. And I always knew you were the smartest person sitting at that miserable dining table," I replied, matching her calm, razor-sharp tone. "Thank you for the pitcher ice water. You handed me the exact geographic anchor I needed to map Bradley's entire financial existence." Naomi did not smile. She leaned forward, crossing her arms over the polished table. Her expression was entirely devoid of any casual pleasantries. "If you are mapping Bradley offshore accounts, then you already know he is running a massive corporate laundering syndicate. But you do not have the complete picture yet. You only see the capital moving across the international borders. You do not see the domestic rot happening right inside our own homes." I kept my gaze locked on hers, signaling her to continue. In the world of forensic accounting, the most devastating evidence always came from the insiders who had finally been pushed past their breaking point. "Trent is not just a pathetic alcoholic losing his allowance to local bookies," Naomi stated, her voice dropping to a low, furious register. "He is deeply embedded in Bradley financial crimes. Bradley needed a domestic proxy to clean the cash before routing it to the Cayman Islands. Trent has been using his connections at high-stakes underground casinos to wash the physical currency for Bradley elite clients. He takes the dirty cash, runs it through the gambling syndicates, and transfers the clean casino payouts directly into the shell companies Vanessa established." My mind rapidly processed the tactical intelligence. It was a classic, highly effective layering technique. Using underground gambling rings provided the perfect smokescreen for massive cash deposits. But Trent was reckless, and reckless men always made catastrophic financial errors. Trent is a severe gambling addict, I pointed out analytically. He cannot handle large sums of cash without skimming off the top. Bradley is a sociopath, but he is meticulous. He would never trust a volatile addict with millions of dollars unless he had ultimate leverage over him. Naomi let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You are absolutely right. Trent skimmed nearly $500,000 from the syndicate last month to cover his own personal losses. Bradley found out. He threatened to hand Trent over to the federal authorities, or worse, hand him over to the corporate clients whose money he just stole. Bradley demanded immediate repayment with aggressive interest to balance the offshore ledgers." Naomi tightened her grip on her own arms, a flash of genuine, unfiltered hatred crossing her beautiful features. "Trent is completely out of liquid cash. His trust fund is empty. So he is going after the only valuable asset we have left. My home." I sat up straighter, my forensic instincts flaring wildly. The sprawling modern estate Naomi and Trent lived in was famously inherited from Naomi, late father, a highly successful architect. It was entirely paid off and worth millions. "The deed is solely in my name," Naomi continued, her voice trembling slightly with a rage she was fighting to control. "My father made absolutely sure it was protected before he died. But Trent is desperate. I accessed his private laptop yesterday while he was passed out drunk. He has been working with a fraudulent notary, highly likely a contact provided by Vanessa, to forge my signature on a massive home equity loan. He is actively preparing to leverage my family home to the maximum limit. He plans to take the cash wire it directly into Bradley offshore fund to cover his stolen debt and leave me completely bankrupted and homeless. When the bank eventually forecloses, The sheer absolute depravity of the Reed brothers was staggering. They were not just stealing from faceless corporate entities. They were actively orchestrating the complete financial destruction of the women they had married to protect their own fragile egos and illicit wealth. When does the loan application process? I asked, my tone shifting into absolute freezing authority. He submitted the forged paperwork to a predatory lending firm. Yesterday morning, Naomi answered, pulling a folded stack of printed emails from her handbag and sliding them across the table. They are expediting the approval. The funds are scheduled to disperse into a joint account in less than 48 hours. Once the cash hits that account, he will wire it to the Cayman Islands and my entire life savings will vanish into thin air. I will not let them take what my father built, Cassidy. I refuse to be collateral damage in their arrogant criminal games. I picked up the printed emails, scanning the forged routing numbers and the fraudulent notary seals. It was a sloppy, desperate execution. Trent was acting out of pure panic, leaving massive digital footprints that my team at Apex Forensics could easily freeze. I looked back at Naomi, completely dropping any remaining pretense of being a helpless victim. They are not going to take a single dime from you, Naomi, I stated, sliding the evidence into my trench coat pocket. I am not just an administrative assistant. I direct a federal forensic accounting division. I have the ultimate authority to freeze any domestic bank account suspected of wire fraud within 60 seconds. I will personally lock down that joint account before a single cent is transferred. Trent will be left holding a forged federal loan document with absolutely no way to pay Bradley back. Naomi's eyes widened slightly, a sudden brilliant spark of profound relief and fierce satisfaction illuminating her face. She had taken a massive gamble by trusting me, and she had just hit the absolute jackpot. But I need something from you in return. I continued, leaning closer to the table. I can block the domestic wire transfer, but I need to bring Bradley's entire international empire down simultaneously. I need the physical ledgers. I need the encryption keys stored in Patricia's home office. You said Bradley installed a biometric safe. Naomi nodded, a sharp, predatory smile finally breaking across her face. The alliance was permanently cemented. The safe is installed behind the built-in bookshelf on the north wall of the study, she explained rapidly. It requires Bradley's thumbprint, but he is lazy. He set up a secondary manual override code in case the biometric scanner fails. I watched him punch it in last week through the reflection of the hallway mirror. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and slid it across the table. I picked it up, staring at the 6-digit code that would completely obliterate Bradley Reed. I am packing my bags and leaving that miserable house tomorrow morning under the guise of visiting a sick relative, Naomi declared, standing up from the booth. Patricia is hosting a massive charity luncheon at the country club tomorrow afternoon. The house will be completely empty. The security system will be disarmed for the cleaning staff. You will have a 2-hour window to walk right through the front door and take everything he loves. I stood up, extending my hand across the table. Naomi gripped it firmly, the shared determination flowing between us. Two women they had severely underestimated were about to execute the most devastating financial takedown in the history of the city. I will freeze your assets tonight, I promised. Pack your bags, Naomi. By the time they realize what has happened, there will be nothing left for them to salvage. I returned to the secure perimeter of Apex Forensics long before the sun even considered rising over the Chicago skyline. The piece of paper Naomi had slid across the table felt like a loaded weapon burning a hole in my trench coat pocket. I bypassed my personal office and walked straight to Lauren at the central command desk. I handed her the fraudulent loan application Naomi had intercepted from Trent. I did not just want to block the transaction. I wanted to build an impenetrable titanium wall around Naomi to ensure she survived the incoming blast radius. Execute an emergency federal freeze on all properties and accounts tied to Naomi. Just ordered, my voice echoing with absolute authority across the quiet analytics floor. Flag the incoming home equity loan as active wire fraud. When that predatory lending firm attempts to disperse the funds this morning, the transfer will instantly trigger a federal lock. Trent will be left staring at a zero balance, completely incapable of paying back the money he stole from Bradley laundering syndicate. He will be utterly defenseless. Lauren's fingers flew rapidly across her mechanical keyboard, initiating the strict federal protocols that only a court-appointed special master could authorize. Within 60 seconds, Naomi's entire financial existence was completely sealed off from her parasitic husband. But I was not finished. I pulled up a blank legal template on my secure terminal. I utilized my extensive background as a Juris Doctor to draft a ruthless ironclad divorce petition for Naomi. I systematically stripped Trent of any potential claim to spousal support or property equity, citing his heavily documented gambling addiction and the active federal fraud investigation I was currently building against him. I printed the finalized petition, stamped it with a priority legal seal, and dispatched a secure courier to deliver it directly into Naomi waiting hands. Trent was officially neutralized. Now it was time to amputate the head of the snake. At precisely 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I pulled my unremarkable sedan into the sprawling, meticulously manicured subdivision where Patricia Reed resided. The timing was absolutely critical. Naomi had confirmed that Patricia was currently holding court at a highly publicized country club charity luncheon. Trent was supposedly meeting with his underground bookies in a desperate, futile attempt to buy more time for his looming debts. Bradley was securely locked inside his glass office downtown, arrogant, oblivious, and entirely convinced he had already won our divorce settlement. I parked 2 blocks away to deliberately avoid the perimeter security cameras monitoring the main gates. I walked briskly down the pristine sidewalk, blending in perfectly with the midday suburban quiet. As Naomi had promised, the heavy wrought iron gates of the estate were wide open to accommodate the weekly commercial cleaning crew. The massive front door was unlocked. I slipped inside the opulent foyer, moving with the silent practiced efficiency of a ghost. The house smelled strongly of chemical lemon cleaner and expensive floral arrangements. I bypassed the grand dining room where Bradley had dumped wine on me just days ago. I did not let a single emotion cloud my tactical focus. I walked purposefully down the long carpeted corridor toward Patricia's private home office. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the second floor, their heavy equipment providing the perfect acoustic cover for my infiltration. I stepped into the dim mahogany-paneled study. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood. I walked directly to the north wall, tracing my fingers along the custom-built bookshelves. I found the specific volume Naomi had described. It was a heavy leather-bound encyclopedia of corporate law. I pulled the book forward. The entire section of the shelving unit clicked softly and swung outward on a concealed hinge, revealing the sleek, black steel face of a high-security biometric safe bolted directly into the foundation of the house. Bradley was incredibly predictable. He relied entirely on the fingerprint scanner, assuming physical security was an absolute guarantee against his technologically inept family members. He never considered the vulnerability of the manual override keypad hidden beneath a small, sliding metal panel. I pulled the slip of paper from my pocket. I typed the 6-digit code Naomi had memorized into the digital keypad. The electronic lock chirped a sharp, high-pitched tone of acceptance. The heavy steel door sprang open with a heavy metallic clunk. I peered inside the dark cavity. There were thick stacks of banded $100 bills, highly likely the emergency cash reserves Trent had not yet managed to steal for the casinos. There were velvet boxes containing Patricia Overflow diamond jewelry, but I completely ignored the physical wealth. My eyes locked onto the only item that actually mattered. Resting in the very back of the safe was a solid-state military-grade encrypted hard drive. This was the absolute holy grail. This small rectangular piece of metal contained the digital signatures for every single fraudulent contract Vanessa had ever drafted. It held the offline ledgers mapping the exact flow of dirty money from Bradley elite clients through Trent underground casino connections and directly into the Cayman Islands shell companies. It was the physical evidence required to bypass any grand jury and secure immediate federal arrest warrants for the entire operation. I reached in and grabbed the hard drive, slipping it securely into the reinforced pocket of my coat. I did not take a single dollar bill. I did not touch the diamonds. I wanted them to know exactly what was missing when the federal marshals finally kicked their doors down. I pushed the heavy steel door of the safe shut. The electronic lock engaged, automatically securing the vault. I pushed the bookshelf back into place, leaving the study looking entirely undisturbed. I walked out of the suburban fortress exactly the same way I had entered, completely invisible, unnoticed, unstoppable. As I started the engine of my car and drove away from the pristine neighborhood, I felt the heavy weight of the hard drive against my side. Bradley thought he had completely destroyed my life with a generic legal waiver and a $10,000 settlement offer. He had absolutely no idea that I was currently driving back to downtown Chicago, holding the exact weapon required to obliterate his entire existence. The trap was fully loaded. All I needed now was to walk into a federal courtroom and pull the trigger. I parked my unremarkable sedan in the secured underground garage of the Central Financial Tower. The encrypted hard drive was a heavy cold weight in the pocket of my trench coat. I bypassed the standard employee elevators and used my biometric clearance to access the private executive lift. It shot upward, carrying me back to the 42nd floor. The entire analytics division of Apex Forensics was waiting for my return. The atmosphere in the Situation Room was electric with anticipation. I walked straight to the main conference table and placed the black rectangular drive squarely in the center. Cameron and Lauren immediately went to work. They connected the device to a heavily isolated, air-gapped terminal. The military-grade encryption Bradley had purchased to protect his syndicate was robust, but it was absolutely no match for our federal decryption algorithms. I stood with my arms crossed over my chest, watching the massive digital wall as the progress bar rapidly filled. The firewall collapsed with a sharp electronic chime. The screen exploded with data. It was worse than Naomi had described. It was worse than I had initially mapped. The offline ledgers displayed a staggering level of financial depravity. There were thousands of fraudulent consulting contracts bearing Vanessa Digital's signature, deliberately hiding behind the shield of attorney-client privilege. There were direct wire transfers matching the exact amounts Trent had funneled through the underground casinos. And tying it all together was Bradley using his executive clearance at the investment bank to integrate the laundered cash into legitimate corporate hedge funds. We had just acquired the undisputed, unalterable proof of a massive racketeering conspiracy. My team did not sleep. For the next 14 hours, the entire floor operated in a state of hyper-focused silence. We cross-referenced every single offshore wire transfer with the forged legal documents Vanessa had drafted. We matched the casino payouts to the Cayman Island deposits. We linked Bradley's signed affidavit of financial disclosure, his sworn federal perjury, directly to the hidden accounts he swore did not exist. Every single piece of the puzzle locked into place, creating an inescapable steel cage of evidence. By dawn, the physical compilation of the evidence was complete. Lauren walked into my private office, holding a thick, securely bound stack of documents. She placed it carefully on the center of my glass desk. It was not just a collection of financial records. It was a fully realized, comprehensive federal indictment. I sat down in my leather ergonomic chair and looked at the cover page. The bold black text read, Forensic Accounting Report Number 402. This was the exact type of report that terrified Wall Street executives and brought down corrupt corporate empires. This was the document that Jonathan Cole and his arrogant law firm charged their clients millions of dollars to desperately fight against. And I was about to deliver it to them for free. I picked up my favorite heavy steel pen. I did not use a generic ballpoint pen like the one I had dropped on the mahogany table during that pathetic manufactured crying session. I turned to the final page of the comprehensive audit. I signed my name with sharp, aggressive, perfectly steady strokes. I signed it not as Cassidy Reed, the supposedly uneducated data entry clerk. I signed it as Cassidy Lawson, Juris Doctor, and Chief Director of Apex Forensics. I reached into the locked drawer of my desk and pulled out the heavy brass instrument that symbolized my ultimate authority. It was the official federal stamp of the court-appointed special master. I pressed the heavy brass down onto the scarlet ink pad. I aligned it perfectly next to my signature on the final page of Report 402. I pressed down with my entire weight. The stamp left a stark, brilliant red seal on the pristine white paper. That vibrant red ink legally transformed the stack of papers from a simple financial review into an undeniable federally mandated weapon. Initiate the dual routing protocol. I instructed Lauren, handing the sealed document back to her. We are executing a simultaneous strike. Lauren nodded, her expression sharp and entirely professional. She scanned the barcode on the cover page, digitizing the finalized sealed report into the secure federal network. Route the first copy directly to the family court docket. I commanded, my voice cold and absolute. Attach it as an emergency discovery exhibit for my upcoming divorce hearing. Ensure it lands directly on the private desk of Judge Monroe. I want it filed as an immediate countermotion to their ridiculous $10,000 settlement offer and his fraudulent perjury affidavit. Lauren tapped the screen. Filed and confirmed. It is officially on Judge Monroe active docket. Now drop the guillotine, I said, leaning back in my chair. Transmit the master digital file to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Copy the Financial Crimes Unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Flag it as an active verified racketeering and money laundering syndicate involving a managing director of a major investment bank and a licensed corporate attorney. I watched the digital progress bar flash across Lauren's tablet. The transmission was encrypted, instantaneous, and entirely irreversible. The data shot through the secure fiber optic cables, landing simultaneously on the desks of the most aggressive federal prosecutors in the country. Transmission complete, Director Lauren announced, lowering the tablet to her side. The SEC and the Bureau have the master file. The trap is officially closed. I turned my chair to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the Chicago skyline, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across the financial district. Bradley was waking up in his luxury penthouse right now. Vanessa was probably wearing my silk robe, sipping expensive coffee, and dreaming about the brilliant legal career she thought she was building. Trent was panicking over his frozen home equity loan, entirely unaware that his domestic fraud was the absolute least of his incoming problems. Patricia was preparing to host another arrogant Sunday dinner. They were all walking, breathing corpses. Their entire world had just been legally incinerated, and the shockwaves simply had not reached them yet. They had spent years treating me like an ignorant, disposable peasant. They had gleefully dumped wine on my clothes, mocked my background, and attempted to leave me completely destitute on the street. They had demanded my absolute submission. I stood up from my desk and smoothed the front of my tailored black trousers. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to walk into that federal family court hearing tomorrow morning. I was going to look them all dead in the eyes. And I was going to watch the absolute, devastating terror wash over their faces when the entire justice system crashed down on their heads. Federal family court was a theater of misery for most. But for the Reed family, it was simply another arena to display their perceived supremacy. I stood just outside the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B, listening to the muffled sounds of their absolute overconfidence filtering through the wood. Through the narrow rectangular glass panel, I could see them perfectly aligned in the gallery rows. Bradley sat with his long legs crossed, checking his luxury watch, and whispering something into Vanessa's ear that made her let out a sharp, grating laugh. Patricia sat rigidly beside them, draped in cashmere and heavy diamonds, looking around the austere courtroom as if the very air was completely beneath her standard. Trent was slouched on the end of the wooden bench, nervously tapping his foot, completely oblivious to the fact that his domestic fraud had already triggered a massive federal lock on his accounts. They were a portrait of arrogant, undisturbed privilege. They had gathered not just to support Bradley, but to actively participate in the spectator sport of my complete financial and emotional execution. I took a slow, steadying breath. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. I was not wearing a faded gray cardigan. I was not clutching a cheap canvas tote bag. I stepped into the courtroom, wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal gray power suit that commanded absolute immediate respect. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek twist. My posture was perfectly straight, projecting the undeniable, freezing authority of a woman who routinely directed federal investigations. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my stilettos echoed like gunfire against the polished marble floor. Every single head in the gallery turned. The casual, arrogant laughter instantly died in Vanessa's throat. Patricia's mouth fell slightly open, her eyes darting aggressively over the sharp, expensive cut of my designer suit. Bradley dropped his hand from Vanessa, shoulder his smug expression fracturing into a look of profound, deeply unsettled confusion. They expected a broken, weeping victim begging for a $10,000 settlement. They were entirely unprepared for the apex predator walking down the center aisle. I bypassed the gallery completely and walked straight through the wooden swinging gate that separated the spectators from the legal counsel. Jonathan Cole was already standing at the petitioner table organizing his thick, intimidating stacks of legal briefs. He looked up, his predatory eyes narrowing sharply as he registered my drastic physical transformation. I did not give him the satisfaction of a greeting or even a nod. I walked directly to the respondent table, placed my sleek, reinforced leather briefcase down with a solid thud, and took my seat. A heavy, suffocating tension immediately filled the courtroom. The bailiff called the room to order as Judge Monroe emerged from his private chambers. He was a highly respected veteran of the federal bench, a man known for his razor-sharp intellect and absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics. He took his seat, adjusted his reading glasses, and looked down at the thick docket file resting on his elevated desk. "We are here for the Asset Division and finalized settlement hearing in the matter of Reed v. Reed," Judge Monroe stated, his commanding voice echoing across the quiet room. He looked over at my table, his brow furrowing slightly when he saw I was sitting entirely alone, surrounded by empty chairs. "Mrs. Reed, the court notes that you have not filed a formal notice of representation. Who is your legal counsel today?" I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. I kept my voice perfectly level, projecting clear across the vast wood-paneled room. "I am appearing pro se, Your Honor. I will be representing myself in all matters pertaining to this divorce and the subsequent asset division." The exact moment the words left my mouth, Jonathan Cole let out a loud, highly theatrical scoff. He stood up abruptly, adjusting his silk tie, practically vibrating with condescending outrage. He wanted to crush me immediately before I could even present a single argument to the bench. "Your Honor," Cole boomed, utilizing his heavily practiced aggressive courtroom voice to completely dominate the space. With all due respect to the respondent, this is a highly complex high-asset divorce involving intricate corporate financial structures. Mrs. Reed is a remote administrative data entry clerk with absolutely zero formal legal training. Her decision to appear pro se is not just a profound waste of this court-valuable time. It is a blatant, desperate stalling tactic designed to harass my client. Cole stepped out from behind his polished table, pacing aggressively to command the attention of the judge. My client made a highly generous, completely voluntary settlement offer of $10,000 during mediation, an offer the respondent blatantly refused after staging an erratic, hysterical emotional breakdown in my conference room. She is fundamentally incapable of understanding the legal reality of her situation. She has no comprehension of asset division law. She lacks the basic vocabulary to even participate in the discovery phase. I formally request that the court dismiss any and all of her financial claims immediately due to her severe documented lack of legal understanding. She is completely out of her depth, and we demand an immediate summary judgment in favor of my client. From the gallery behind me, I could hear Patricia let out a soft, highly satisfied hum of agreement. Bradley leaned forward against the wooden railing, his arrogance fully restored by his high-priced attack dog. Vanessa was practically glowing with triumph. They thought Cole had just delivered the fatal blow. They thought the judge would look at my lack of a hired attorney, agree with the senior partner assessment of my intelligence, and throw me out onto the street with absolutely nothing. I did not interrupt the lawyer. I did not raise an objection. I simply stood at my table maintaining absolute freezing eye contact with Judge Monroe, letting Jonathan Cole dig his own professional grave before I dropped the federal guillotine right on top of his neck. Judge Monroe clasped his hands together, his expression entirely unreadable as he stared down at the plaintiff table. He looked over his reading glasses at Jonathan Cole, acknowledging the senior partner. Aggressive demand for an immediate summary judgment before shifting his sharp, calculating gaze directly to me. Mrs. Reed, Judge Monroe said, his deep voice cutting through the heavy tension of the courtroom. Opposing counsel has made a highly forceful motion to dismiss your claims based on your lack of legal representation and your supposed inability to comprehend the financial complexities of this asset division. Do you have a formal response to this court before I issue my ruling? I did not flinch. I did not show a single ounce of the manufactured panic I had displayed in the mediation room just days prior. I reached down to the polished wooden table and unlatched my reinforced leather briefcase. The heavy metal lock snapped open with a sharp, definitive click that reverberated loudly across the silent room. I reached inside and pulled out the thick, securely bound stack of documents. The stark, brilliant red seal of the federal special master gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Your Honor, I began, my voice perfectly steady and echoing with absolute, freezing authority. I am not here to argue over an insulting $10,000 settlement, nor am I here to waste the valuable time of this federal bench. I would like to formally submit a comprehensive financial discovery exhibit into evidence. I am submitting Forensic Accounting Report number 402 regarding the massive undisclosed and highly illicit hidden assets of the defendant, Bradley Reed. The exact second the words left my mouth, Jonathan Cole let out a booming, highly theatrical burst of arrogant laughter. It was a harsh, mocking sound, specifically designed to humiliate me completely and entirely discredit my presence in the room. In the gallery behind me, I could hear Bradley lean back against the heavy wooden bench and actually start chuckling aloud. He nudged Vanessa, who let out a sharp, condescending giggle of her own. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sigh of pure disgust, leaning over to whisper something cruel to Trent. They were all participating in the public execution of my dignity. Jonathan Cole aggressively buttoned his suit jacket and stepped out from behind the petitioner table. He paced toward the center of the room, playing to the gallery and the judge with the polished, predatory arrogance of a man who believed he owned the entire judicial system. Your Honor, I must strongly object to this absolute, unmitigated circus, Cole declared, waving his hand dismissively toward my table without even looking at me. My client is a highly respected managing director at a top-tier investment bank. His financial disclosures are a matter of pristine, heavily verified public record. He even signed an affidavit of financial disclosure just to satisfy the emotional hysteria of the respondent. Now, his disgruntled, unemployed administrative data entry clerk of a wife wants to submit what I can only assume is a fabricated homemade spreadsheet she printed off a public library computer. Cole stopped pacing and turned to face the bench, shaking his head with manufactured exhaustion. This is exactly why pro se litigants are a severe danger to the efficiency of the judicial system. She is pulling random inflated numbers out of thin air because she is bitter about being handed a divorce. She likely watched a documentary on financial fraud over the weekend and suddenly decided to play the role of an investigator. It is pathetic, and it is a severe insult to the dignity of this courtroom. The bailiff stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor. He retrieved the bound report from my outstretched hand and carried it up the steps, placing it squarely in the center of Judge Monroe's elevated desk. Jonathan Cole watched the transfer with an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. He pointed a manicured finger at the document resting on the bench. "We absolutely refuse to acknowledge these fabricated garbage reports." Cole continued, his voice rising in aggressive, booming volume. "This is a federal family court, Your Honor. We deal in documented, undeniable reality. We deal in verified, ironclad financial facts. My firm spends millions of dollars annually to retain the services of elite, untouchable organizations precisely because they represent the absolute gold standard of financial truth." Cole leaned forward, resting his hands on the wooden railing, separating him from the judge, setting the ultimate fatal trap for himself. This court only operates based on certified federal-level forensic data from elite government-appointed oversight organizations. We only recognize audits from institutions possessing the highest level of security clearance and analytical rigor. We are talking about institutions like Apex Forensics. We do not accept random spiral-bound trash created by a woman who files basic paperwork for a living. I stood perfectly still behind my table. The absolute breathtaking irony of his statement hung heavily in the cold-conditioned air of the courtroom. Jonathan Cole, a senior partner who charged $1,000 an hour to protect the corrupt elite, had just enthusiastically validated the exact weapon I had placed on the judge's desk. He had just passionately demanded that the court solely rely on the specific federal agency that I personally directed. He had built an impenetrable wall of credibility around my work without even realizing it. "I completely agree with opposing counsel, Your Honor," I said smoothly, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. I turned my head just slightly to look directly into Jonathan Cole. Arrogant, predatory eyes. A federal court should absolutely never rely on fabricated garbage. The court should only trust verified, air-gapped, legally binding data extracted directly from the Cayman Island shell companies that Mr. Reed currently operates. The specific words Cayman Island acted like a physical blow to the room. The arrogant laughter in the gallery instantly died. I did not even have to look backward to know that Bradley's smug smile had completely vanished. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt incredibly thin, thick with the sudden, sharp scent of incoming devastation. Cole opened his mouth to object, but the words died in his throat as Judge Monroe slowly picked up the heavy document, his eyes locking onto the bright red federal seal, stamped on the cover page. Judge Monroe did not immediately respond to Jonathan Cole. He sat in total silence on the elevated bench. The heavy mahogany courtroom felt as though the oxygen had been completely vacuumed out of the air. The judge slowly opened the thick, bound document I had submitted. His eyes immediately fell upon the cover page. I watched his gaze track over the crisp, black text, stopping dead on the vibrant raised red seal of the federal special master pressed firmly onto the lower right corner. His eyes shifted to the bold, handwritten signature placed directly beside the seal. A profound, heavy stillness settled over his features, the kind of stillness that precedes a catastrophic natural disaster. Jonathan Cole stood at the petitioner table, aggressively adjusting his silk tie, completely misinterpreting the extended silence. He thought the judge was staring in utter disbelief at a fabricated piece of trash. He genuinely believed he had already won the morning. Cole puffed out his chest, preparing to deliver another booming theatrical monologue about the sanctity of the federal court system and the absolute delusion of pro se litigants attempting to play lawyer. Judge Monroe slowly closed the file. He reached up and methodically removed his reading glasses, placing them onto the polished wood of his desk with a soft, deliberate click. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together, and looked down at Jonathan Cole. The expression on the judge's face was not one of anger or irritation. It was a look of profound, devastating pity. It was the exact look a man gives to a pedestrian who has just unknowingly stepped directly into the path of a speeding commercial freight train. Counselor Cole, Judge Monroe began, his deep voice slicing cleanly through the absolute quiet of the room. "You just spent the last 5 minutes of this hearing passionately defending the integrity of the federal oversight system. You went on the official record demanding that this court solely rely on the unassailable data provided by elite government-appointed institutions. Specifically, you named Apex Forensics as the absolute gold standard of financial truth in the United States." Cole smiled, a slick, predatory grin that reached his eyes but lacked any genuine warmth. "Yes, Your Honor. My firm trusts their methodology implicitly. We rely on their corporate audits to protect our most valuable clients from frivolous financial claims. We respect their institutional authority above all others." The judge did not return the smile. He did not blink. He simply tilted his head slightly to the side. Then I find myself in a state of absolute bewilderment. Counselor? Judge Monroe's voice dropped an octave, resonating with a freezing, inescapable authority. If your firm relies so heavily on their audits, and if you respect their institutional authority as much as you proudly claim, do you truly not recognize the woman standing directly across from you today? The slick, confident smile on Jonathan Cole's face froze instantly. His brow furrowed in sudden, sharp confusion. He physically turned his head, looking at me across the aisle, as if seeing me for the very first time. He took in my tailored charcoal suit, my perfect, unyielding posture, and the freezing, predatory calm radiating from my eyes. A flicker of genuine, primal unease finally breached his arrogant facade. He looked back at the judge, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. In the gallery, the smug whispers abruptly ceased. Patricia stopped fanning herself with her program. Trent sat up straight, his bloodshot eyes darting nervously around the room. Bradley leaned forward, gripping the wooden railing of the spectator partition so tightly his knuckles turned a stark, translucent white. A sudden, inexplicable panic began to claw at the edges of his mind. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a routine divorce hearing to the terrifying precipice of a federal execution. Judge Monroe picked up his wooden gavel. He struck the sounding block once. The sharp, explosive crack echoed like a gunshot, demanding absolute submission from every single breathing soul in the room. "Let the official court record reflect," Judge Monroe declared, projecting his voice to every corner of the vast courtroom, "that the respondent appearing before this bench is not an administrative data entry clerk. She is Cassidy Lawson. She is the chief executive officer and the lead forensic accountant of Apex Forensics." The words hit the room like a physical shock wave. The air grew incredibly heavy, but the judge was not finished destroying them. He picked up the bound report and held it up for the entire court to see the glowing red seal. Furthermore, Judge Monroe continued his tone, carrying the absolute crushing weight of the federal government, recognizes that she is currently sitting before this bench acting in her official capacity as a special master appointed directly by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The document she just submitted is a verified federally mandated forensic audit regarding a massive act of money laundering and racketeering syndicate orchestrated by the petitioner. The courtroom went dead silent. It was a suffocating, terrifying vacuum of sound, a kind of absolute silence where you can actually hear a heartbeat flatline. I turned slowly, pivoting on my stiletto heel to face the gallery. I looked directly at the man who had thrown my clothes into trash bags, mocked my $40,000 salary, and demanded my total submission. Bradley Reed looked exactly like a corpse. The blood had completely and entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. His jaw hung slack, his perfectly styled hair suddenly seeming out of place above such a broken expression. His eyes were wide with a primal, suffocating terror as the sheer magnitude of his fatal error crushed the breath entirely out of his lungs. The brilliant investment banker, the arrogant master of the universe, suddenly realized he had invited the chief director of a federal financial task force into his home, married her, and handed her a signed, notarized perjury confession on a silver platter. He had not just lost his divorce. He had just lost his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, and his entire future. Beside him, the facade of the rising legal star violently shattered. Vanessa's face contorted in absolute, unfiltered horror. She suddenly understood exactly why I had asked for that specific disclosure form during the mediation. She understood the catastrophic legal implications of her own golden notary stamp. She was not just a mistress moving into a luxury penthouse anymore. She was a documented co-conspirator in a federal RICO violation. She began to physically tremble. Her hands shook so violently that she lost her grip entirely. The thick, heavy stack of legal files she had been clutching to her chest slipped from her fingers. The binders crashed down onto the hard marble floor, the sharp, echoing clatter shattering the dead silence of the courtroom. Papers spilled everywhere, a chaotic, messy reflection of their entirely ruined lives. Jonathan Cole stood frozen at his table, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. He looked from the judge to the federal audit resting on the bench, and finally, to me. The senior partner realized in real time that his arrogant junior associate and his wealthy client had just dragged his prestigious law firm directly into the center of a federal criminal indictment. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I stood perfectly still, letting the absolute destruction of their arrogance wash over the room. They had demanded a brutal legal battle. I had just delivered a total, unmitigated slaughter. I did not give Jonathan Cole a single second to recover his breath or formulate a desperate defense. I turned back to face Judge Monroe, my voice ringing out with the lethal clinical precision of a federal prosecutor delivering a final execution order. "Your Honor, I stated, gesturing smoothly toward the red-sealed document resting on the elevated bench. As detailed in Section 1 of that report, Bradley Reed signed a sworn affidavit of financial disclosure yesterday morning during our mediation. He explicitly declared under penalty of perjury that he possessed no offshore assets. Section 2 contains the fully decrypted banking ledgers from his hidden Cayman Islands shell companies. Those ledgers prove with absolute forensic certainty that Bradley Reed is currently laundering over $4 million for corrupt corporate entities. A collective horrified gasp echoed from the gallery behind me, but I did not stop to let them process the devastation. I pointed directly at the pale, trembling junior associate standing next to my husband. Furthermore, I continued, my tone dropping to a freezing register. Section 3 outlines the fraudulent consulting contracts utilized to clean that illicit cash. Every single one of those fraudulent contracts was drafted, authorized, and digitally signed by Vanessa. She intentionally used her legal license and the prestigious reputation of Cole and Partners to shield federal financial crimes behind the veil of attorney-client privilege. She is not just a mistress. She is a fully documented co-conspirator in a federal racketeering syndicate. Jonathan Cole physically recoiled from Vanessa as if she had suddenly caught fire. The senior partner realized his entire career and his law firm were actively standing in the blast radius of a massive federal indictment. He immediately raised his hands, stepping entirely away from the petitioner table. "Your Honor," Cole stammered, his booming voice reduced to a panicked, frantic pitch. "My firm had absolutely no knowledge of these illicit activities. We formally withdraw our representation of Bradley Reed, effective immediately." Judgment Rowe did not even acknowledge the fleeing lawyer. He looked down at the forensic report, his jaw set in a rigid line of absolute judicial fury. He looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto the two criminals standing paralyzed before his bench. "Bradley Reed," Judgment Rowe commanded, his voice shaking the very walls of the mahogany courtroom, "you have committed blatant documented perjury in my courtroom. You have attempted to utilize the federal family court system to facilitate and conceal a massive international money laundering operation." The judge looked past my table and nodded sharply to the two heavily armed federal bailiffs stationed near the heavy oak doors. I had already coordinated with the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission before I walked into the building. The bailiffs had been waiting for the exact moment the evidence was formally entered into the court record. "Take them into custody," Judge Monroe ordered, striking his wooden gavel with a violent, explosive crack. The two bailiffs moved with terrifying tactical speed. They crossed the room in seconds. One officer grabbed Bradley by the shoulder, spinning the arrogant investment banker around and slamming him forcefully against the polished wooden table. Bradley let out a pathetic, breathless choke. He did not fight back. Not fight. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer, unmitigated shock of his entire world collapsing. The heavy metallic click of steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed sharply across the silent room. Vanessa completely lost her mind. She fell to her knees on the marble floor, sobbing hysterically. Her hands shaking so violently, she could barely hold them up for the second officer. "Please," she begged, her voice a shrill, desperate shriek. "I am a lawyer. I am a lawyer. Not anymore," Judge Monroe stated coldly, looking down at her weeping form with pure disgust. "I am forwarding this forensic report directly to the State Bar Association with my personal recommendation for your immediate permanent disbarment. You will never practice law in this country again. Put her in irons." The second set of handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was absolute symphonic perfection. In the gallery, the reality of the federal raid finally hit Trent. He watched his untouchable younger brother get shackled and read his Miranda rights. Trent knew the forensic report contained the casino ledgers. He knew the federal agents would be kicking down his door in a matter of hours to arrest him for his role in the domestic money laundering lair. Pure animalistic panic took over his body. Trent shoved past his mother, knocking her heavy designer purse to the floor, and bolted toward the center aisle, desperate to escape through the back doors of the courtroom. He did not make it 3 steps. Naomi stepped gracefully out of her wooden pew and moved directly into the center aisle, completely blocking his path of retreat. She wore a stunning, perfectly tailored emerald suit. She looked like absolute royalty standing in front of a desperate, pathetic coward. Trent skidded to a halt, his chest heaving, looking at his wife with wild, bloodshot eyes. "Move," Naomi Trent hissed, trying to push past her. "I have to get out of here right now." Naomi did not flinch. She did not move a single inch. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with a glowing priority seal. With a swift, incredibly satisfying motion, she slapped the heavy documents directly against his chest. Trent instinctively grabbed the papers before they fell, looking down in absolute confusion. "You are not going anywhere, Trent," Naomi said, her voice smooth, elegant, and laced with absolute, lethal authority. "Those are your finalized divorce papers. Attached to them is a federal court order executing a total immediate freeze on all of your bank accounts, your credit lines, and the fraudulent home equity loan you tried to take out against my property yesterday morning. You have exactly $0 to your name. You cannot even afford a bus ticket to run away." Trent stared at the legal freeze order, his mouth opening in a silent scream, as his entire escape plan instantly evaporated. He was completely trapped, bankrupt, and waiting for the federal agents to arrive. Patricia Reed finally broke. The matriarch who had spent the entire morning sneering at me, the woman who had demanded my absolute poverty and submission, let out a visceral, horrifying scream of absolute despair. She fell back against the wooden bench, clutching her chest, her diamond bracelets clinking uselessly against the wood. She watched in total helpless agony as both of her golden elite sons were utterly destroyed in the span of 5 minutes. Her legacy was ash. Her wealth was seized. Her social empire was permanently annihilated. I did not stay to watch them drag my ex-husband out in chains. I smoothly closed my reinforced leather briefcase, the sharp click signaling the absolute end of the war. I turned my back on the screaming mother, the weeping mistress, and the arrested banker. I walked calmly down the center aisle of the courtroom. Naomi turned and fell into step perfectly beside me. We did not look back at the chaos, the crying, or the destruction we had orchestrated. We pushed through the heavy oak doors, leaving the toxic, rotting legacy of the Reed family trapped inside their own custom-built cage. We walked out of the federal courthouse and stepped into the blinding, brilliant Chicago sunlight. The air felt incredibly clean. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute triumphant weight of true freedom. I had not just won a divorce. I had protected my dignity, secured my financial future, and completely eradicated the monsters who tried to bury me. Naomi looped her arm through mine, a fierce, beautiful smile breaking across her face. We walked down the marble steps together, leaving the ruins of our past behind, ready to conquer the magnificent, untouchable lives we truly deserved. The story we just witnessed is an absolute masterclass in the fatal cost of underestimating others. Arrogance completely blinds people to the truth sitting right in front of them. Bradley and his toxic family mistook Cassidy's silence for weakness and her humility for incompetence. The most profound lesson here is that true power never needs to be loud, boastful, or performative. While the Reed family spent their time shouting their supposed superiority, belittling her background, and manufacturing a false reality to stroke their own fragile egos, Cassidy was quietly gathering facts. She did not waste her precious energy arguing with people who were absolutely committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she let them talk. She allowed their overwhelming narcissism to make them profoundly careless. Furthermore, this narrative teaches us that our inherent worth is never defined by how abusive people treat us. When you are entirely confident in your own abilities and your own truth, you do not need to seek validation from those who actively try to tear you down. Cassidy and Naomi both recognized that their environment was specifically designed to break them. Rather than shrinking themselves to fit into that abusive dynamic, they built a flawless exit strategy based on undeniable evidence and unshakable self-belief. Financial independence and emotional control are your ultimate shields. Cassidy did not let her justified anger dictate her actions. She let her sharp intellect drive her strategy. They weaponized their arrogant assumptions against them. Ultimately, the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you is not returning their petty cruelty. It is completely outsmarting them, permanently removing their power over your life and walking away entirely free. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever had to quietly outsmart someone who severely underestimated your true potential.